Let's go on to the big thing before I was born, the cross-country trip of America made by Vince and Louise Libbon.
Another aspect of our wonderful fun time together. And I know I'm beating on this to death, and I know I'm probably going to be ridiculed by it, but I've always felt that there's a uniqueness there, that we've had fun superior to other fun times, and I'm sure the next person is going to say, well, we had fun times too. But I just looking back at our fun times, I can't imagine them being as duplicated or replicated as often as we've enjoyed them. And the cross-country trip was that kind of a trip. We had come to a point where I realized it would take, I was told, at least 2 to 2.5 months before we got the bar results, so I'd know whether I was practicing law or not, or able to get a license. And so my options were to either go work as a clerk somewhere for minimal wage in a law firm, or do something with our 2.5 months. And I had already decided I wanted to go out on my own, even though, again, because of Mrs. Hancock, we had connections if I wanted to go work for a large firm. In fact, we had even gone down to talk to somebody, I believe, in that regard. I did, and a position was offered, but I wasn't interested in working for somebody. I didn't want to take orders from other people above me. I've always had a problem with that. Having, sidebar,
now you
even
don't care.
got kicked out of ROTC.
Except for the law.
Sorry?
Well, you argued the law. That was an order from above you.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean,
there's always someone above you, is my point.
My heirs should know that I couldn't even stay in ROTC in college, which was a requirement of all football players the first year in college, and I lasted 1 semester because I got so many demerits. I could not stand taking orders from someone who I felt was less competent than me. But anyway, that's me. I didn't want to work as a law clerk for a law firm. I didn't want to work for a law firm.
We had already made these plans, so we knew as
So-
soon as he took the bar, we were going to go on this cross-country
I was
trip.
just trying to give
The
how
reason
we
why.
arrived
Okay.
at that.
Okay.
The foundation. And so anyway, we had decided what would be fun would be to go across country, and we had purchased the van for that reason. And I was going to take the bar exam and leave on the cross-country trip with Mom thereafter immediately. So I'll let Mom then give the details of what happened.
So the bar exam was 3 days, correct?
2.5.
2.5 days. So
It was.
we only had the one vehicle, so that last day I took him to the exam.
Friday morning.
And
And it was being held.
I'm not sure if it was a Friday morning, but regardless.
It was Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday morning. We left at Friday noon, and it was downtown for the foundation of it at the convention center where the exam was being held, Phoenix Convention Center.
Right.
Go ahead.
Not the Symphony Hall?
That was the convention center.
Oh, okay. And so my job was to take him in the morning, come back to the apartment, and pack up. Because all we really had was clothes and pots and pans and stuff, because the apartment was furnished. So there was, most of the kids that lived in the apartment were, like I said, 19, 20-year-olds. But there was one couple that were older. He had decided to go, or she had decided to go back to school, and they had a small child who I did babysit for them a couple times. And he saw me loading all this stuff in, and so he gave me a hand because I boxed everything up, and he helped me pack up the van. I had the VW packed to the gills, and of course we couldn't take that on our cross-country trip. We had to go dump it with Huey. So I got it all packed up, and I picked Pop up in front of the Symphony Hall Convention
And where was
Center.
you at that time?
He
was
had gone
still
back to Los
Oh,
Angeles.
okay.
Yeah, he just came out for a visit.
Oh, okay.
He was in Los Angeles. Remember, we paid him
Yeah.
to store our other stuff. So
And if I can interject here, honey, the last test happened to occur across the street from the convention center at the hotel right there, I believe it was a Hyatt. And I remember sitting there with Joe Causey next to him in the exam, and finishing the exam and walking out with him and looking down the steps, and I could see Mom, because the convention center isn't like it is now. It was just Symphony Hall and one building behind that, and the rest was open space, and I could clearly see her standing near the van on that side street waving. I could see the van was packed to the hilt, and I had such a great feeling about being released and the pressure of that exam being over and realizing we were starting on such an adventure.
But we decided to go by way of Vegas. So we went up to Vegas, and we did a little gambling, and we spent the night there. And then the next morning we left for Los Angeles, and we went to Oakwood Apartments. I think we went by and saw my family too. Like, I don't have much recollection of that, but we must have.
I don't remember that, but we could have, I guess.
And then we went to Huey's, and he helped us unload the van, and we stored that stuff with him, and we were still paying him a monthly thing. And from there we went up to Santa Maria, and we had to sort of do that because we were going to be gone for so long, and we had bills to pay. Even though we didn't have a mortgage and stuff like that, we still had credit cards and whatnot. So we put his mom, on those days there was no internet to pay bills and stuff, so we put your mom on the checking account so she could write checks and pay our bills while we were gone, and we had all the bills forwarded to her. So we spent a couple days, I think, in Santa Maria.
Right.
And then
And Bernadette was there living with my mom at the time. And they were all excited about the trip. In fact, we found out afterwards that they had...
we sent postcards all along to everybody. I even sent them to my coworkers at Disneyland, because they would always put postcards up in the cash control room of people who had gone places. And she made, of all the postcards we sent them, she made us a scrapbook with them, which we still have, which was nice. And so when we were ready to leave, we took off from Santa Maria up the coast. And
we backtracked from our honeymoon because we enjoyed driving up the Highway 1, which is called the El Camino Real, a Spanish term for the conquistadors that settled California, civilized California, and they had Highway 1, the original highway that went from San Diego all the way to San Francisco.
Which translates to the King's Highway.
El Camino Real is translation, yes.
The King's Highway.
The King's Highway, Highway 1.
Technically the Royal Highway.
Well, yeah, but I think, yeah, maybe, but everyone called it the King's Highway. So we went up
We started
the 1.
The 1.
And up we went. And we stopped in the Bay Area to visit Tim and Nancy Wells.
Friend of ours.
Tim had started law school with Papa, and he decided law school wasn't for him, and after the first year he dropped out and went to work for Johnson & Johnson, or Johnson Wax, was it?
Yeah, Johnson Wax.
Johnson Wax.
And we had a nice visit with them.
They had had a baby, so we got to see their little girl. Annie was her name, and we spent the evening with them and the night with them, and then the next day
morning,
we took off from there.
I think we cruised through San Francisco again and had our cracked crab and bread because that was so good then. And then we went on up the coast, and this time I think we went through the forest, right? We saw
the redwoods.
Redwoods for the first time, yeah, which we took you to later. But there's a Redwood National Forest. If you ever get a chance to visit, it's a wonder of the world. These giant trees, they're so big, and they're only located in Northern California, North Central California, or coastal, I guess would be a better description, but they're not actually on the coast.
And the ferns that grow under them are as big as any ferns I've ever seen.
It was like prehistoric.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Yeah, it's
forest.
like giants live there.
That was our first big thing that we had never seen before.
Correct.
And then we went on through Northern California. I remember Eureka being interesting, overcast.
We stayed in, well, was that in Oregon or California, the bay where they
Coos
shot
Bay.
the birds?
Oh yeah, Bodego Bay was our
Bodego
stop.
Bay was where we stayed, and that's where the movie The Birds was shot. So that was a quaint little fishing town.
And the whole trip we had the same theme. And a side note that's important, we had the idea that we would not, if at all possible, take the
Main highways.
Main highways. Whenever possible, we would take side roads and see what America was all about.
There was no GPS then, so we had maps, and we look on the map, and when we saw a little road that went the same direction as the big interstate highway, but was a smaller road, we took that one. The road less traveled.
And another
aspect was we had a CB radio.
AAA was in existence then, though, right?
Yes, AAA
So we got all your maps.
So we got all our maps, and a
CB radio was something that was employed mainly by truck drivers so they could communicate to each other. It was a transmitter within the cab of your vehicle where you could go on a frequency, and the truck drivers had perfected it. In fact, they had developed their own language that was almost a foreign language if you heard it for the first time.
Breaker, 1-9, this is Goldie Wang. Over. Chant 4 there, Goldie Wang. This is Rubber Ducky. What's your chant 20? Over. I've got Preparation H in my rear and Smokey the Bat in my back door. We got us a convoy. Over. Yeehaw! Copy that, you some bitch pile of monkey nuts. Open wide there, Rubber Ducky. I am entering your mouth now. Over.
But we got a book.
And we wanted to use it so that we could not only have access to what was going on in the travel world, but also to be able to contact people in that local area on it. It was like a shortwave radio.
Right. It was mostly used by truckers, but people in towns used them too. They like to listen to the truckers, and they like to communicate with the truckers, or whatever reason they had a CB radio.
So we got a radio and a book that would explain terms. And as it went, when we first listened to it, we couldn't understand a word what they were saying, barely. It was gibberish to us.
You were supposed to have a handle, so he was Captain Kirk and I was Spock.
But we didn't.
Sounds
even
kind
know,
of reverse.
We didn't even know that until further, and it was only about a third into the trip that we started picking up words. And by the time we got, I'm jumping ahead, but this is important to the CB story. By the time we got to the East Coast, we were beginning to understand it and occasionally commenting to the comments the drivers.
I think we were in the Midwest when that happened, because that's when you became a front door. Yeah.
No, it was on the way back that we became a front door, honey.
Okay.
If anything, you should have been Sulu and Chekhov.
I'm trying to depict how difficult this language and how unique it was. So, finishing my story, if I can, real quickly. By the time we got to the East Coast, we could probably understand, and we were venturing out by saying a few comments. We knew, for instance, Smokey on the side meant Smokey at the 4-8 meant that there was a police waiting at the 48 mile post, stuff like that. But by the time we started heading back towards Arizona, we were getting so adept at it that through the state of Texas, we actually led a caravan of trucks, and we had developed our handles at that time because we knew if we were going to be a part of the process, we had to have a handle. So I was Captain Kirk and she was Spock, and that's where the handles developed. And through Texas, we led about a 20 truck caravan through it, and it's important to lead because you're the lead vehicle to point out where the Smokies are, which were highway patrol. And
one of the truckers said, "Go ahead, Captain Kirk, you're the front door."
And Mommy said, "We got a Smoky on the side about the 2-4 mark," or something like that. We were getting very good at it. By the time we got back to Phoenix, we were CB.
We never listened to the radio on that trip because we were too busy listening to the CD, because it was very CB radio, because it was very entertaining. Listen to them; talking and stuff.
You went in the middle of the 70s, the golden age of classic rock, and listened to CB radio on your trip.
At first, we sometimes had the radio on, but then it was like we missed hearing the truckers. But we'll tell you more about that as we go on this trip.
But one of the other side aspects of the CB radio, which
I was going to get into that.
Okay, go ahead. I think this is the time to say it, because
there was always locals that had CB radios in these smaller towns, because a lot of them, it was their entertainment. It was the old ham radio that a lot of people used to have, and this was the new thing, the CBs. So they like to listen and communicate with people. So it came in quite handy, because we pull into towns and we'd say, "We need a local. Is there any locals out there?" And we get somebody, "Yeah, I'm a local." And
Is there any locals out there?
Yeah,
that was the term.
That was the term.
And that's how you said it.
And they'd say, "Yeah, well, there's a local here," and we'd say, "Well, we're here now. We want to know where
we're passing through in the next half hour,
and we want to know where there's a good place to eat." "Oh, I can tell you that. The Ma's kitchenette on da-da-da, someplace where we never
Yeah,
stop.
we're looking for Italian food. There's a good Italian restaurant in this area, and
Or
we get
good
something
food.
like
We
that.
had the best restaurants because the locals always told us where to go.
And the first time this came into play, if I can go back to where we are on our trip, is when we entered Oregon. And that morning after we left Eureka, I believe, Bodega Bay of Eureka, we got into Coos Bay, which is on the south corner of Oregon, and we started up the coast of Oregon, and we had heard so many fabulous things about how beautiful the Oregon coast was on Highway 1, which now extended all the way up through Washington. But it was fogged in, and it was like about 9, 10 in the morning, and we didn't know whether to continue in the fog or adjust our trip, and that would make a big circumvent of the whole United States.
And may I interject here? We didn't really know when we were going to turn east. We said, well, should we go all the way up to Seattle? Should we go through Oregon and then go across? We weren't really sure. So
and
go
every
ahead.
night we'd sort of plan out, looking at our maps and saying, well, we'd like to see this, like to see this. But in any case, we had planned on going up the Oregon coast further, but the fog was bothering us. So we asked for a local out there, and our question was simply, how long does this fog last this time of the year on the coast? And the answer was, well, you can pretty much assume it's going to last until at least mid-afternoon. And we
Maybe
saw,
all day.
Maybe all day. And
See,
we saw
we-
no reason to drive through fog because we couldn't see anything.
Yeah, and being from Southern California, of course, it's foggy there in the morning, but it burns off. So we were saying, well, does this burn off and we're going to be able to see the coast? Or are we going to be looking at fog all day? If we're going to look at fog all day, we might as well turn east.
So that was an aspect of the CB radio that was really beneficial. We got a lot of good tips, not only in eateries or places to stay or visit, but roads and where to go on roads. And that was the first experience we had that this is a great idea we got having the CB radio. So we headed east at that time.
Yeah, we said, well, we might as well turn east. So we did visit the 2 universities there.
Yeah, we went, no, not both,
We
just
just-
Eugene. We went through the University
The
of
Ducks.
Oregon, the Ducks.
The Ducks, that's right.
And we spent a little bit there because it was a college campus, and,
It was
and
beautiful.
I had known Steve Prefontaine, who had gone to Oregon, and we wanted to see what it looked like. It was famous for its track athletes, so it was, I was partial in that way to seeing it. It was
Plus,
just
I wanted to get a
beautiful,
pair of shorts that said duck across the butt,
which you did.
which I did.
It was their colors, green and yellow or whatever they were. There's a ducks across the rear
You
end.
don't want? Did you get a one that says beaver across the
No,
front?
because we didn't go to the
We
Beavers,
didn't
but
go
that
to
would have been
State
funny.
Corvallis, no. But we headed east through Eugene, and
Bend.
my impressions of Oregon was that it was absolutely beautiful state all the way through, and it's so diverse. It reminded me of California. It had the coast that was so beautiful, although it wasn't the sandy beaches. But heading east,
Green
it had
and
the
wet.
greenery and wet and rivers. And further east, it turned into an area of sand dunes, and then farmlands, and then we reached the Idaho
Not
border.
as much rain in central Oregon. We went through Bend, Oregon.
Yeah. Those are some of the towns we went. The impressions were that Oregon was absolutely beautiful, and the next big stop, aside from, well, we should say that we would stop in camping areas primarily, and every third or fourth day we'd actually get a hotel room so we could shower and sleep in a normal bed. But at that time we were so much younger and so much lighter that sleeping in the back of the van was a piece of cake, and we enjoyed it.
There was,
But we
the
got to
mattress
smelling, so we'd stop and
The
shower.
mattress was about this thick. It wasn't very comfortable, but when you're young, you can tolerate that. Now, there were some camping grounds that had showers,
Yes.
but we wanted to get a hotel where you could, watch a little TV and stretch out in a real bed. And about every third or fourth day, like he said, we'd do that.
Then we started developing after we stopped in Boise, Idaho, and saw how beautiful the capitals were, a trend of seeing the capitals of the states as much as we could and comparing them.
In fact, we spent, how many nights did we spend in Boise? Was it 2 or 3?
But at certain points it was required, we felt we needed to stay more than just a stopover, stay a couple days, because it was either so interesting or because we were so worn out that we needed to be able to get out and stretch and walk
And you didn't
around.
make it all the way up to Washington?
No.
We did not. So we
what-
went directly east from Oregon
Over the
across
Snake
Oregon
River.
to-
What was the most beautiful capital you saw there?
Well, of all the capitals we saw, Boise turned out to be, aside from Washington, D.C., one of the prettiest, and it was a replicate of Washington, D.C. But Boise City itself, which got us to stay there for a couple days, was so beautiful.
Oh, it had creeks running through the town. It was just gorgeous.
And it had a situation where we were on one edge of town, and the other edge of town was about 5-8 miles this way, but you could see from our hotel room the other edge of town, and the whole inside was a grassy, nice little park area with the town on both sides of it. It was really unique. And at the one end was the Capitol, and we were at the other end with the hotels. Plus, we wanted to sample the famous Idaho potatoes that we had heard about too.
Well, you didn't tell them about going across the Snake River and the Oregon Trail.
Well, the Oregon Trail didn't come until we came into Nebraska. We saw that.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the Snake River
I thought
is a famous
it started
river.
right at the Snake River.
Well, actually, it starts back east and goes all the way to the coast. The Oregon Trail. But no, it didn't start at the Snake River.
Oh, okay.
Snake River is famous because
It was beautiful.
and it was mentioned in movies. The Robert Mitchum movie, River of No Return, and Captain Knievel. Whatever,
No.
Evil Knievel
Evil
made his
Knievel.
Captain
famous,
Knievel.
Evil Knievel
He
did
was a
his famous
daredevil.
motorcycle jump over the Snake River.
which was really just a rocket with a parachute attached to it, and he only went halfway, and the parachute came down, and it wasn't a great daredevil stunt, in other words. But the Snake River was famous. The River of No Return was one of my favorite movies, Western movies, and yeah, the Snake River. We saw a lot of famous places. Snake River was one of them. Boise was our first stop.
Not first stop.
First
Capital.
extended stop.
Extended stop. So we hated to leave there because it was so beautiful, but we knew we had to move on.
So we went across Idaho, and we stopped the next night at a beautiful place. Another magical turn of event was the whole trip was magical, again, just like the honeymoon. We stayed in a place called Idaho Falls, and we had such a great placement of our van, which occurred often on our trip, where we literally backed into a parking lot right where the falls cascaded over. And across the falls was the Mormon temple, which was lit up at night. So we went to sleep and fell asleep to the sound of the falls with our windows open and seeing the Mormon temple all lit up behind that. Remember that? Such a beautiful place.
The VW van, you could open up the back and it had a screen type thing so bugs couldn't get in. So that's what we did. But the funny thing is we were woken up in the middle of the night by people coming out of the restaurant that were intoxicated. And they were making a lot of noise, but they didn't bother us. In those days, you could do stuff like that. Nowadays, the cops would probably come by and make you move.
Yeah.
But
And that's how we handled the sleeping arrangements. When it got time to sleep, we either looked ahead on the map for a AAA campground or just pulled into a parking lot and stayed there. In Ohio, we stayed on the Columbus, Ohio State University, right next to the stadium in the
we
student
just pulled in the
lot.
parking lot and slept in the parking lot.
It was a nice way of traveling because you didn't have the cost and you could literally stop anywhere. In Niagara Falls, we parked along the street and stayed there. But anyway. Craters of the Moon, Idaho City, was it? You remember that?
Nope.
We had already through Oregon been delighted with all the new stuff and interesting places that we had never even imagined seeing. And we went into Idaho, and the thrill was not lessened at all. We came across a place on our trek across Idaho towards Yellowstone, a place called Idaho City, and they had a national monument there, so we decided to drive up and see it. And it was actually where the astronauts were training for the moon landing. And they chose that place because it looked so much like the moon. Remember it now?
Yes.
With the craters and all the volcanic rock. It was just the most desolate place you'd ever believe. Nothing growing anywhere for miles, and found it very interesting. Can we see something besides
So we made it into...
After Idaho, we went into the Yellowstone Rocky Mountains area and stayed in Yellowstone for 2 days, I think, at least 2 days.
In those days, you didn't need reservations. We went into the park, And as long as you left something in the campground, people respected that was reserved. So we had a TV tray. Remember, we used to use the TV tray. And so we took our TV tray and put it in the campground. And then we went and toured around. So when we were done in the evening and came back to our campground, of course, no one had taken it. And
another beautiful thing about this, a magical thing about this trip that we quickly realized was that we were able to see all the tourist attractions before they became overpopulated. Yellowstone, when we visited it, was not that crowded. And what we've heard nowadays is jam-packed people every day of the week. But it was such that we could park pretty much anywhere, and we could see the top sites, the old geyser without millions
Old Faithful.
Old Faithful without millions of people around.
Old geezer.
I took my camera. I was heavily into photography with my 35mm camera and was taking pictures all the time, which incidentally I wanted to see if you wanted to take that or not, or at least the case. But the next beautiful aspect, magical aspect of our trip was that unexpectedly we went across the divide there, not the divide, but a mountain pass, and dropped into the Teton Valley. And we wanted to see the Grand Tetons because I had heard about them in
Jackson Hole,
Wyoming. And a former girlfriend of mine,
Jody,
whose name shall not be mentioned, had gone there and talked about it, so I wanted to see the beauty that she talked about it, and it was absolutely beautiful. The Grand Tetons were named for its main peak, which is a French word for big tit or giant tit, which the French fur trappers had named it because the peak was shaped in the...
It's shaped like a breast with a nipple on top.
Anyway,
and
it was such that it was so uncrowded when we went through, and it was so perfect with our van that we backed up into a lake called Crystal Lake with no one around, and again opened the van and had the view of this beautiful crystal clear lake with the Grand Tetons in the background.
No one around.
No one around. We barbecued hot dogs, I think, that night.
Probably.
And had hot dogs and looked at the great Grand Tetons. We had some fabulous pictures, again, of that we still have. And stayed that night in the Grand Tetons, left there, and I think the next big state was Nebraska when we crossed the Oregon Trail. And I've got a picture of the Oregon Trail at that point, too. The famous Oregon Trail, for posterity's sake and the grandkids' sake, that the early settlers came across when they were moving from the east United States, settling into the west. It was a covered wagon trail.
There was one landmark called Chimney Rock.
What's one of the landmarks? There are many landmarks.
Right, but this was one that you could see from many miles away, and so the wagon trains knew they were going in the right direction. They kept that in their view. And the neat thing about that...
what did you call it? Chimney Rock. Yeah.
Chimney Rock. And the neat thing about it, it was made of that limestone kind of stuff, so you could ride in it. And people back that were taking the wagon trains would leave messages there, sometimes for people that they knew were coming behind them.
But most importantly, it was gave hope to the wagon travelers that when they saw that leaving St. Louis, Missouri, and that was the first major landmark that they knew they were on the right way, and it was something that right next to it, not too far away, was a cliff where they would sign their names.
Right on the Chimney Road. Unfortunately, they had to put a chain link fence around it because people had started desecrating it. So they did preserve it, which was nice. But, people would say, leave messages for people they knew were coming behind them. It was kind of interesting. And it was about that time that we found out Elvis had died.
He died in August, yes. It was...
of all the big historical U.S. events, that's the one that struck you. You mentioned without any prompt from me.
That's right.
Elvis died.
That was a big deal.
Elvis.
That was 1977. We were going across country, and we were somewhere in the Midwest on what's not 40, but what's the I-80? Is it Interstate 80, the one that runs through Nebraska and...
Can't remember.
And we were just about in that area, somewhere near Nebraska. And usually we didn't have the radio on because we were so into the CB, like we had talked about. And for some reason we did have the radio on. I think you wanted to catch a little news or something, and we heard that Elvis had passed away, and it was shocking.
Shocked everybody at the time.
Why was that?
He was the king. Everybody knew of him from the 50s onto the 60s into the 70s. He was
And he still had a
everything.
lot of
most
female,
popular celebrity.
even when he got, later in
Old
his
and
life.
fat.
Yeah, older and he quite heavy. He still had the women flock into his concert. They were mostly middle-aged women like he was, but they were, were in love with him all those years. So that was a sad day.
He affected all of America because of the different generations that grew to know him and accept him and love his work, from the Las Vegas senior citizens who went to see his shows when he was fat and bloated and towards the end of his life, and the early 50s when he was getting everybody who was the generation before him all upset because he was moving his hips too much.
And he had those sideburns. That was considered wild back then. But he was one of the first white people who sang black music. Let's call it like it was.
You mean stole black people's songs?
Yeah, which they called black music back then, but it was the start of rock and roll and everything. Soul, rock and roll, blues, all came from the black culture.
Probably the only one that would be comparable to him would be Bob Dylan, as far as how he reshaped rock and roll.
Oh.
And of course the adults at the time couldn't understand. Their teenagers were so enthralled with that type of music, and they didn't even touch each other when they danced.
But larger in scope was Elvis, because he went not just music, but he went into acting and theater shows and the whole bit.
You can call it acting.
He had hits
Yeah.
over a 30-year span.
He made many, many movies, and they were all basically the same. There was always two girls after him, and there was always a fist fight, and he was always some kind of entertainer, or not necessarily always an entertainer. He was a race car driver with Anne Margaret in the Vegas one.
He was a cowboy in a couple movies.
And his first one, Love Me Tender, he was a farm boy. And then Jailhouse Rock.
And they always had his music during the movie.
But those string like Girls, Girls, Girls and Blue Hawaii and all those, it was kind of the same type of thing.
Kind of like what Judy Garland and
Yeah.
what Mickey Rooney were doing.
Mickey Rooney, right.
One movie after another that was identical in plot.
Yeah. During that era, it was era.
During that era.
It was pretty much the same. And there was always two girls in it, and one was a nice girl and one was not a nice girl. And the not nice girl was always trying to cause trouble because she really liked Elvis, but Elvis really liked the nice girl, and there was always misunderstandings, and somewhere along the way he'd get in a fist fight. There'd be a lot of singing, a lot of wiggling the hips, a lot of dancing, girls in their little fringe. That was big then, those little fringe.
My impression of Nebraska was not favorable other than the historical markers. It seemed flat and overcast for summer and not much to it, but we did see some great historical markers. I remember
one was something Bluff.
having lunch.
Oh, sorry.
I remember having lunch up at the top of Scotts Bluff,
Scotts Bluff.
which was a famous historical marker, and I'm trying to remember why. I think it was because of the view that it gave westward towards.
And people wrote in that too,
Yeah.
on those cliffs too. They've left messages for people.
Yes, they left it on Independence Rock as well, and Devil's Peak, and not Devil's Peak, Devil's Pass.
Right.
So from Nebraska, I believe we went then into Iowa, and we actually stopped in the capital, Nebraska, and got our impressions of Omaha. And,
We always toured the capital.
and or at least drove by it. I think the next state was Iowa, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know.
And there we stopped and visited a former college friend of mine, Dave Keene, who we had nicknamed Iowa, and his family had a farm there, a large farm, and we stayed there with them.
Well,
didn't
we were looking forward. Well, we always wanted to try things that we knew the state was famous for, like Idaho with the potatoes, and Iowa. We were looking forward to the corn,
Right.
and so we got there. So we said, "Well, we want corn," and he says, "Well, unfortunately, corn isn't in season right now." So we never got to try the corn.
A couple interesting anecdotes from the tour that David gave us of his farm were first the marijuana plants or the hemp plants.
Yeah.
And apparently the story was that during the World War II, the government had authorized these farmers in certain sections of the Midwest to grow hemp for making ropes that were needed in the war. And so they developed a strain of marijuana that did not have the chemical ingredients of THC in it that would give the hallucinogenic or the highs from it, but it was merely there for the strength of the hemp. And we were amazed because being from the 60s and 70s, we knew all about marijuana, that you could have actually marijuana plants, because we saw them and they were like 8-9 feet high. We said, "Those are marijuana plants, Iowa." And, yeah, but you can smoke all you want. The only thing you're going to do is get a cough. There's nothing to it.
They weren't growing those anymore, but because the seeds would fall off, they'd come back. And he said once in a while the authorities would come by and say, "Now you need to cut those down," even though they weren't really had no potency to them. But the interesting thing, if I may say, was that's the first time I got to know about cows.
That was another little silly, little bit funny thing.
So David Keene says, "Oh, cows are very, very curious animals." And we said, "Oh, really?" He goes, "Yeah, come here." And there was all these cows sitting around, standing around. And he says, "Let's just go in this shed over here."
No, you did something with a stick first, didn't you?
No, he did that afterwards.
Okay.
So he said, "So let's just go in this shed and you'll see." So we go in the shed and we're standing there, and pretty soon one cow sticks its head in. They're curious. They want to see what you're doing. You went in this shed. What are you doing in there? And pretty soon one cow's head, and then another cow's head, and then another cow's head. And they're all coming over. "What are you guys doing in there?" And so I thought that was hilarious. And he says, "And watch this." So we went back out, and they're all standing there in a herd. And he picks up a stick, and he goes, And the whole time he's doing that, the cows' heads are going. They're following this stick around, and that's when I fell in love with cows.
The other funny thing I can remember from that visit with Dave was that I remarked how flat Nebraska was, but I said, "God, Iowa looks even flatter than Nebraska. There's nothing to it except fields and fields, flat fields." And he said, the highest elevation in Iowa is 242 feet, and it's a compost pile.
The state compost pile.
That's the highest elevation in Iowa. Remember
Shit
that?
Mountain. All right, so we left off in a different state, in a different city,
We're
and
down
a different
Denver.
time. We left off with you guys on a farm in Iowa. Where did you, on your cross-country road trip, shortly after getting married? Where did you go next? Take us next
On the tour.
On the tour.
The next state we visited was Illinois, and specifically Chicago, which we voted as our prettiest city.
More than prettiest, friendliest, big city.
And we parked and had our car worked on and walked around downtown Chicago and up the top of the Sears Tower.
Yeah, we were at our 1200. Back in those days, at 1200, you had to have your car serviced. It was a brand new car, so we were at 1200 miles. So we found a garage, a Toyota, not a Toyota, what was it, a VW garage, and took our car in. And they had TV screens all in the garage, and a couple baseball games were going on. And
That's true. We did walk around, drive around Wrigley Field also. That was an important little highlight.
And then
because it's so famous.
we went out in the street, and we weren't sure where things were, and people actually asked us if we needed help. They could see we were sort of looking like tourists, I guess. And they said, "Do you need help with anything?" Everyone was so friendly, and we asked them where places were, and they just took the time out to tell us and show us, and that's why they were voted the friendliest city.
And we also were impressed with the pretty fountains, especially the Roosevelt fountain. Remember that one?
In the park? It's in a lot of movies.
Did you do anything special in Chicago?
Other than going to the top of the Sears Tower?
That's pretty
Probably
special.
not.
That was pretty special in and of itself.
Then we moved on from Chicago and went across the border into Indiana and went through Gary, Indiana.
Not Louisiana, Paris, France, New York, or Rome.
My impressions of Gary, Indiana.
Gary, Indiana. Gary, Indiana. Gary, Indiana. My home sweet home.
Was like a slum. A lot of black population, a lot of railroad tracks because I guess the Chicago lines went right through Gary, and a lot of mills with pollution. And then we dropped down south through Indiana and we stopped and toured the Tippecanoe Tyler II type exhibit where they had the famous Indian War Memorial. And then we went east into Ohio, and the next stop was Columbus.
We went to Indianapolis, the capital.
Oh yeah, we went to Indianapolis too. That's right.
Yes, that
Well,
was the
going
big
back,
thing.
let's do a pop quiz for Mom. Who is Tippecanoe?
And Tyler too.
Who is Tippecanoe?
He ran for president.
Tippecanoe is not a he, it's a place. Tippecanoe is where the Indian fight occurred, I believe. But of course, James is going to correct us if we're not right.
You went to Indianapolis.
We went south a little further into Indiana, and the capital, Indianapolis, we toured, and it was remarkable because it was the one of the first laid out cities in America around the turn of the century, whenever it was, and they did a real nice design with the structure of the city, where they had the downtown center piece with the government, the local government and the state government, and right in the middle of the center of town was a war memorial that was just took up a huge block. You literally had to go all the way around just to see the whole memorial. And then they radiated the cities as though it were a wheel.
The streets in the city.
The city streets, I'm sorry, as though they were spokes in a wheel. And that was cool the way they designed it. And
That memorial was like the center of the town, and all the major streets went out from there. It was really quite impressive.
Very impressive. And then we moved into Ohio, and I remember we stopped and later in the day and slept on campus of Ohio State. Remember that?
Right by a dorm in the parking lot.
Right in the parking lot. And we had a breakfast in the morning, I think of donuts, and then we
May I say something?
Sure.
In those days, they didn't charge you $400 to $600 to park on campus like they do nowadays. That's all.
And I think we already spoke about how we sometimes stay right there on the street and sleep there, and then in the morning, every 3 to 4 days, we get a motel room to sleep in a regular bed. I think
But it was perfect sleeping on campus because it was,
But the significant thing about Columbus, even though they had a very pretty capital, was that while we were on campus, they were practicing their preseason football team was practicing. And we went and caught the end of practice because it was anyone could walk in the stadium. And they were just coming out after about 10 minutes and watched them come out. And guess who was the last one coming out? None other than the infamous coach Woody Hayes. He's infamous because he was not only well known as a coach in football back in the 70s and 60s. He had a slogan of 3 yards and a puff of dirt or something like that, meaning that he loved to run. But he was infamous because of his temper. And he one time, when an opponent was running back a touchdown from a kickoff, stepped onto the field and cold cocked the guy. And he also was known for being pretty rough with his players. And Mom was aware of his reputation.
Well, wait a minute. You forgot the biggest thing is he punched a photographer once for taking a picture of him.
Yeah.
So we approached him, and I was nervous. In the picture you can see I've got my hand up like this on my collar. And Papa said, could I take a picture of you with my wife? And he was so sweet. He was like, sure, come on over. Puts his arm around me and the whole bit.
Pretty blonde like you.
And I'm like this in the picture.
And in fact, I carry a copy of that picture in my wallet in case you want to make a
well, I'm
copy.
familiar with that picture somewhere.
And I just show anybody from Ohio State who's an Ohio State fan, oh, you'd be interested in seeing this picture of my wife. And they say, that's Woody Hayes. Yeah, she's right. She was very nervous having that picture taken. We headed east across the middle of Ohio. We stopped and had lunch at a lagoon. Remember? They took a creature from the Black Lagoon picture of you that I remember.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
And then we got to the border of Pennsylvania and stopped in Youngstown because it was an interesting town on the river.
Youngstown, Pennsylvania?
Actually, it's Ohio, I think.
Oh, okay.
And then we crossed into Pennsylvania and trekked on into Pittsburgh, my hometown.
Sharpsburg and McKees Rocks, to be exact.
Well, Pittsburgh, but
Yeah.
and in Pittsburgh we had a very humorous occasion. You want to tell about it? Where we scared Dad's friends?
Yeah. Papa had on a black shirt that day, and he went into the clothing store that he knew his father's friends owned and worked in. And he came in and he says, I'm looking for someone named, what was
Tarazi.
it? Tarazi. And he said it like real gruff, like he was like a mobster or something looking for him. And I'm Tarazi. And he says, my dad sent me here. And he's like all nervous and everything. And then
He said, who's your dad?
and he said, Vince Libbon. And he said, oh my gosh, oh, you used to stand on my car seat and get my seat all dirty. Remember? I'd take your dad somewhere and you'd have to go with, and he'd stand up. And
So we took pictures outside with him, outside of his clothing
and his
store.
best friend Sheik happened to be in there, and he came out, and they just couldn't be nicer. In fact, Sheik took us to his private club for a drink later, remember?
And
Is
had
this
introduced
the
Vince
same?
Libbon's son.
Is this the same Sheik who was friends with your grandfather?
Yeah.
No, this is a Sheik that was one of my dad's closest friend, who
Oh,
I
dad's
suspect is my father.
Oh.
My father.
Oh, don't even say that. Your mother got so mad when you said something like that. She did not like that.
And so after we went down to Sheik's little club and got introduced as Vince Libbon's boy and his wife, we visited a couple of my aunts, I think.
We
One of
surprised
McKee's-
them. Yes, you went and surprised Aunt Ralphie.
Yeah, I have Hobbit aunts.
She, well, I'm sure those pictures are in the book. She came up to about here on me. And then we went over to McKees Rocks to see your Aunt Mary,
Okay.
and whose husband hadn't worked in 30 years, and she had to whisper that to us because I think she was embarrassed at how her house looked, and so she said, he hasn't worked in 30 years, she said to us. We said, oh, okay. So, but I guess she stayed with him anyway.
And what impressed us about Pittsburgh was how beautiful it was. We were expecting steel mills and pollution, and it was clear blue sky. We went downtown and looked at the University of Pittsburgh, where my dad went to school, and the beautiful tower. We went into the tower and saw
Yeah.
some classrooms. It's a large cathedral skyscraper right there in the middle of campus.
Right, and at that time they kept the classrooms the way they were originally, probably back in the 20s or 30s. They're all big oak desks and just beautiful. But we also went on the incline.
And then we went across the river to the incline and took some pictures of Pittsburgh. And the incline is like a train that goes up the side of the hill. Pittsburgh's located on hundreds of hills.
It's almost like a ski lift, not a ski lift, but one of those big ones that hold
A gondola.
a gondola. It almost looks like that, but it's on a track that goes up the side of the hill, because Pittsburgh's very hilly.
But it's also situated at the
Right, and you can see where
river
the
origins of Three Rivers, so you could see this from the incline.
hence the name of the stadium, Tri-River Stadium.
Three River Stadium.
Oh, Three Rivers.
Can you
sorry.
name the Three Rivers?
Allegheny, the Mohican or something.
Oh, that's the Mohicans River.
Monongahela.
The Monongahela.
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 Now say sea anemone.
Sea anemone.
And what's the third one? that those two go into?
I don't know.
Ohio.
Ohio, that's right.
That's
And
the easy
actually,
one.
Fort
I know.
Pitt was founded in the 1600s, right on that convergence, and that's why the Pittsburgh name came from, because it was named Fort Pitt after a famous general. Anyway, we had a real fun time visiting relatives and sightseeing in Pittsburgh, and I think we stayed the night, or did we head up into Jamestown, New York after that during the day?
No, because we didn't go later in the day, and we went around. Didn't we tour Jamestown before we went to see my grandma, or did we go
No,
afterwards?
I think what we did is that we left Pittsburgh, so we didn't stay anywhere with relatives or friends there. Not that we had any friends, and went into New York and stayed there, and then we went across what they call the Finger Lake district of Upper New York.
Yeah.
Real beautiful part of New York, all green.
We camped there.
And camped there, and went through the
Five Fingers.
Finger Lake district, and went through the town that's known as the birthplace of where the Hall of Fame is for baseball, Cooperstown. And then we went into Jamestown.
Okay. My grandmother lived there with her sister, my great aunt Dale.
Jamestown, and we saw where her dad went to school, the high school. It's still standing.
And my cousin Donna too.
And
my uncles.
Yeah, that's right. We took pictures of your grandma's original home, your grandfather's original home, I believe.
Well, my grandmother and her sister still live there, but my great grandfather built it. And all the children were born in that house except for my Aunt Dale, because she was one of the younger ones. She was born in a hospital. But my grandmother, no, actually it's the other way around. My grandmother was 2 when he built the house, and Aunt Dale was born in that house. So she lived her whole life in that house, because she married her husband George, and they lived on the upper floor, or vice versa, and my grandmother and her husband Henry lived on the lower floor. I think it was reversed though, but whatever. It had a basement and 2 floors that had full kitchens, and then an attic.
And then we went, I remember in Jamestown, going to the library, which was an old structure, and they were having a book sale at the time. And I picked up 3 books that you will inherit that I've been preserving for him. One is the Diary of Ulysses S. Grant, and these books are real old books. And one was on Abraham Lincoln, and the third one was the infectious disease book with all the photographs at the turn of the century and even into the late 1800s by the German doctor photographer that I think I've shown to you. And when you're ready, you can have it. But it's a special book, so you need to preserve
And
it.
wasn't one of them on Abraham Lincoln?
I did say that, I believe.
You said Ulysses S. Grant.
The Diary of Ulysses S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
Anyway, then we left James.
In fact, they shipped them to us, remember? We didn't even have to carry them with us.
Yeah, that's right.
She said, oh, we'll be happy to ship them to you. So, and they were like giving them away practically, and they were pretty nice books.
That infectious disease one was valuable, I bet.
You know who would like that?
Don't give it to him. You keep it. You'll want to keep it.
So, I don't remember Seneca Falls so much, but I do remember the Five Finger Lake area of New York where we camped and spent the time, and it was mind-boggling. It was one of my favorite spots on our trip. It was just so beautiful and unexpected. Anyway, go ahead. Seneca Falls?
Yeah, it was just impressive because it was a campground, and we found all the campgrounds up in that area to be isolated and well prepared,
Maintained.
And Seneca Falls was a short hike from the campsite to a beautiful little falls back in the wooded area. And to correct what I said earlier, it was a stark difference of what I expected in New York State, having been only familiar with the lower southern part of New York City. It was all green and lush and beautiful around the Five Finger Lake districts. Just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we went on into the next stop. I remember is where we stopped. We're at a particular place where You can see 4 states from that position. You can see.
Called Four Corners?
No,
No.
you can see 4 states.
Not standing them.
And you can see the New York and I think it was Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire or Vermont. I'm not sure, but it was up the top of a mountain, and we.
Mount Washington?
I don't know if it's Mount Washington. It might have been, but in any case, we were now in New England, and from there we went down into Boston. And I remember the outskirts of Boston. We stopped at a famous pond.
Walden Pond?
That's right. And the famous American author who made Walden Pond and other stories famous, can you remember his name?
Walter Walden?
Henry David Thoreau.
Oh yes, Thoreau.
And you remember what Vincenzo did at that place?
Yeah, you threw a rock in there.
I snuck over the fence and threw a rock and got chased by the security guard.
Yeah, of course. You always have to break the rules.
But anyway, then we drove down into Boston City proper. I'm very impressed with that city, especially from the historical aspect, which appealed to me.
Going back, you went through Albany, I'm guessing?
Yes.
Anything special there?
Well, we saw the Capitol and took pictures of the Capitol, of course. We were interested because it was so far removed from New York City and so much more rural town, at least back then. But we didn't stay more
They had
than
a
an hour or
They
so.
had a pretty big downtown area, though.
Yeah.
No.
But that's when we got back down to New York. We were up in New England.
Oh, you came to Albany on the way back.
Yeah.
Okay,
down
continue
to
on, sorry.
And the thing about the New England drive that we remember taking the drive down the coast is that we passed again from a historical viewpoint where the Mayflower.
You know what you left out? Niagara Falls, going into Canada. When did we do that?
That must have been after we left Jamestown then. Yeah, I got mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
We went up into Niagara Falls, and it was the evening time where we parked. Remember, we ended up sleeping right there on the residential street.
What we
remember-
did was, I couldn't wait to get to Niagara Falls because you hear everyone who used to honeymoon at Niagara Falls, and it was so romantic. And we got there it was all 9s. We got there at 9 p.m. And at night they have it lit up really beautifully with colored lights and stuff. We go down to look at it. It's 9 o'clock at night. It's 90 degrees out, and the humidity was 90%, and there was mosquitoes everywhere.
Mosquitoes.
And it was like, yeah, that's pretty. Now let's go. And I couldn't wait to get out of there. But you're right. We did find a residential area and sleep on the
Slept
street.
on the street, and then the next.
Not on the street. We parked our car on the street and slept in our VW bus.
And then we went across the border in the morning to see the falls in the daytime on the other side. And then we went a little further into Canada and had bought some cheese and bread and had a little picnic, I think, with some wine and on Lake St. Catherine Lake.
There,
No, it was St. Catherine's, but the lake was one of the Great Lakes.
Yeah, and the thing about going, and it's probably not that way anymore, but going into Canada was so underdeveloped in the United States. It was beautiful. Everything was green. And there was all this grass. And on the other side, the U.S., there was all skyrise. And, it was all built up. So it was really, really different to see it from Canada's side.
Yeah, I'm getting a little mixed up. I'm not sure how we got to that spot where we saw 4 states, whether we went up there and came back into New York or vice versa. I kind of think you're right. We went to the Niagara and then went to that four states view area and then traversed down the east coast where Plymouth Rock was and the Mayflower.
Boston.
Right. No. That's north. And then we went out to that little cove, that point right below Plymouth Rock,
That's right.
which is famous too.
They have the big rock down there. Okay, Cape Cod.
They catch codfish there. We went across after we left the area where you could see the 4 different states from one mountain over to the coast and up into the north of Connecticut, New Hampshire, in the Cape Cod area, which was big to me because of the history. We saw the bay, Plymouth Bay, where the original Mayflower landed with the Pilgrims, and they had a little nice rock designation of where they...
With the year engraved on it that they landed, and they had it under a little
And it was...
gazebo thing near the water, remember?
Yeah, I remember it was drizzling, and we decided to take the coast route right along the ocean as another diverging, and see the actual Cape Cod and Miles Standish's statue there. And, a lot of fun and beautiful scenery driving down the East Coast down into Boston, and then went further down into Boston, Massachusetts, and that's where we hit the Walden Pond. And then Boston, we walked around the city and saw all the historical sites. Very, very pretty, well done. Right? Anything you remember about Boston?
I remember red brick everywhere. Red brick, beautiful town though.
Yeah,
Beautiful city.
any New England clam chowder in Boston?
Did we ever
We
get...
must have, yeah. And I know we ate there. I don't have any special remembrance of it, but I think
Boston baked beans.
we were looking for lobster because we're on the East Coast.
Yeah. We seemed to always miss everything as we went across. Like when we went through Iowa, it was corn season was already over with. We never got
Through
any
Idaho, the
potatoes. It wasn't potato season or whatever, and it was just sort of funny where we were missing everything. But I don't really remember what we ate in Boston.
And then we dropped down to Connecticut. It was very interesting going to the East Coast, though, and seeing all those historical spots just for me. And I remember a picture we took near, I believe, the Indian statue, Tecumseh, I think that was the name,
We also
with
took-
you in the rain. And, you
And
were all-
Bunker Hill, we took the picture of Bunker Hill. You
Yeah.
know, wait till you see the white of their eyes. They have the statue there with that guy saying that.
And then Connecticut was just a short drive into New York City.
I remember the sayings, but I don't remember who said them. You can see history isn't my forte.
In New York City, I remember going across.
Well, wait a minute. Didn't you go into Rhode Island yet before that?
That was up above. Yeah, we went to Rhode
Well,
Wait a minute.
Okay.
You're bypassing Connecticut, which was one of my favorite places with a big mansion.
You're sort of glossing over New England.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I
We didn't go up
know
past.
much
We
yet.
didn't go north of Boston, did we?
Yes.
Oh, we did.
So talk about Connecticut then, and then you can talk about Providence, which you talk with me about, and all the beautiful
Yeah.
houses and whatnot.
Yeah, I think she's getting mixed up with Connecticut. Connecticut was just a quick drive through to get to New York, but backing up a little further north,
Wasn't it Newport though?
Newport Beach, Rhode Island.
Oh, okay.
And
I thought we were
the
in
interesting
Connecticut.
thing about the capital of Rhode Island, which was the town of,
Providence,
is the capital's up on a hill.
overlooking the ocean.
That's a real beautiful Washington Dome type miniature Capitol building with a dark statue on top, and I can't remember, the statue's pointing somewhere. I don't know if it's an angel or what, but it was just an outstanding
It was
architecture.
one of the prettiest capitals. I mean, the surrounding of it, the view of the ocean, all this green grass, and just really, really pretty. But Newport,
And then we drove down into Newport.
oh my gosh, you talk about wealth. Those houses were just unbelievable.
High society.
Yes, gorgeous homes. Just beautiful.
We drove down the main street there where you could look down the long driveways to these beautiful mansions, and you could see, if there weren't hedges or trees, that their backyards were
Was the ocean.
extended grass and trees, and then beyond that was the peninsula, the ocean peninsula, where Newport Harbor was. And then we actually drove across New York Harbor, remember, where they hold the regatta, the yacht race, the America's Cup. They used to, but now they go all over the world holding it, I think. But that was a real beautiful area that we remember for the mansions and the wealth. That's right.
Fly just buzzed my ear.
Anyway, then we went through the Connecticut, which what impressed me is how short of a drive it was from Connecticut into New York. And you can see why people commute and stay in Connecticut, and they take the train from that James Garner Doris Day movie, where the three of them, not Doris Day, but Kim Novak,
Oh yeah, boys' night out.
they lived in Connecticut and took the train into New York where they lived.
Well, yes, people live in Connecticut and commute to New York. People with
Anyway.
money.
In New York, I guess we didn't have a lot of desire and time to spend time there. I remember we got off the bridge, and I don't know which bridge it was, just to say that we went into Brooklyn or the
Probably
Bronx.
the Brooklyn Bridge. Oh.
It might have been the Brooklyn. It was either the town of Brooklyn or Bronx, coming from the north in Connecticut. I don't know what it is, but we decided just to drive off and go into the town, and it was so weird looking, poverty and druggies on the street corners, that we went about 2 blocks and turned around and got back on the bridge and drove into Manhattan. And in Manhattan, we basically went around the St. Patrick's Cathedral, which took us about a half hour just to go 1 square block.
Traffic was horrible. I ran into, remember we got a
For little
postcard.
Scotty, yeah.
No. Mrs. Hancock.
Oh, okay.
You asked her if there was anything she'd like us to bring back, and she said, I collect postcards, just send me a postcard.
Mm-hmm.
And her being a big supporter of the Catholic Church, and we were in New York, we thought she would like one of St. Patrick's Cathedral.
But other than that, we did not stop in New York.
Drove
City.
through.
We drove.
Didn't see the Empire State Building.
Well, you
drove
could
by
see
it.
it, but
City,
we didn't drove by it even.
Central Park at all.
No, we drove around the large square block of St. Patrick's Cathedral and left town, but we saw in the distance the Empire State Building. We didn't see the park, obviously. But no, we didn't see that. We left.
New York's not a town you want to drive around in.
We concluded New York was a place you want to be able to spend a week or two. And we only had a short time if we were continuing on our trek, which pulls us back into Pennsylvania, and we went through Amish country, and that was real pretty country, a lot of farming area. And then the next stop was Gettysburg, correct? Where you weren't feeling well.
That's right.
I'm going to tell your little story about me looking for, you always call them arrowheads, but it wasn't Indians.
But you said there could even be arrowheads. He was looking for some remnants from the Civil War.
Arrowheads.
Like they'd still be there,
Yeah.
after 200 years or whatever.
I was like died and gone to heaven at Gettysburg because it was such a historical, well, you and I went too, James, but this was my first experience seeing it. And I was just enthralled looking at each statue and each battlefield very carefully. And poor Mom wasn't feeling well. She stayed in the car most of the time.
It was the wrong time of the month. I was having a bad day that day. Oh, awful.
But I enjoyed it. And then from Pennsylvania, we dropped down into North Carolina, I believe, was our next state where we...
Well, wait a minute. We did...
No, Washington, that was the next
Yeah,
one.
we went to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And toured around there. And we spent, I think, a couple days there, didn't we? 2 or 3 days, but we realized that you really needed longer than that, even a week.
Mm-hmm.
We went to the Smithsonian. We couldn't even... and we couldn't even finish seeing that, remember? And we saw all the other, the Abraham Lincoln and but the Washington Monument to the top was closed. They were refurbishing it that year, and so you couldn't tour that. But
Sorry about that, folks.
we could see it from a distance, and we saw, who do we see besides Lincoln? We saw Jefferson.
Jefferson.
They were alive?
Memorial.
The statues.
The memorials, honey.
Yeah, the memorials. And
Basically the same tour that you and I had.
They're so old they saw Lincoln and Jefferson.
we had tea with them. And then we went down to where Washington's house.
Born. Yeah.
His house. I don't know if he was born there,
No,
was he?
not born. He
Yeah.
was his house,
His
right?
house
What was
on
the
the
name of that town?
on the Potomac, what do you call it? Potomac River.
Uh-huh.
You know, and it was interesting. And then we saw the snake. Woo! Because it was at the house, and they had all this green grass, and then the river, and you toured the house, and the little lady was dressed up like from that period, and she would tell us about the different things, and it was amazing how small the house were. They didn't put much size into houses back then. But the backyard and this back porch was huge, and so we decided to walk down the river, and all of a sudden
Why do we want to go down the river? I wanted to judge whether he really could capable of throwing a silver dollar across, remember?
Yeah.
And there's no way he made it. I don't care if he had a great Major League Baseball arm and skipped it all the way across. The Potomac was too wide.
Yeah, it was huge.
But yes, on the way across the grass, this big, long, maybe 6 foot
black
snake
I don't know, probably
slid
harmless,
through the grass in front of us.
Oh yeah, well I think we'll go back to the house now. So, but that was interesting. And then we went to see somebody, was it Ulysses S. Grant's tomb? We saw somebody's tomb after that. Oh, no. It was Washington's burial with Martha. Remember they were in like a little shrine near that house?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we went to see.
You know who's buried in Grant's tomb?
Grant?
Cary Grant?
Ulysses S. Grant, maybe?
And then we dropped down into North Carolina, wasn't
We did other things too. We saw the Eternal Flames of John F. Kennedy with, in
Arlington Cemetery.
There was, and his son was buried, the son who died in infancy was buried there. And that we had to see that. What other sites do we see near Washington? Can you remember besides that, those?
No, I'm not sure. James
Capitol?
Travelogue.
We
drove by the White House. We didn't tour the White House, of course, but we did, all the other stuff.
Pentagon.
Don't remember seeing the Pentagon.
You know what you forgot about Chicago?
What?
The museum there, the famous.
Oh, the Heard Museum.
The Heard Museum. Is it the Heard Museum?
Oh,
no.
Museum of Natural History.
Yes, the one where they shot that movie. Isn't that the same?
The Relic.
The Relic. Yeah, we saw
That's
that.
That's where the lions of Tsavo are.
So back to Chicago, that was very impressive. That museum.
Yes, it was. We toured that and had a good time seeing that. And then the famous stadium, the city stadium's right across the street as well, which I can't remember.
Still in Chicago now.
Mm-hmm.
We're going back to Chicago, folks.
Yeah, sorry, folks.
Anyway.
And take your time. Reflect on everything.
Well, the next thing I remember after leaving
Washington, D.C.
was dropping down into North Carolina.
And wasn't it here...
When did we get on the Blue Ridge Highway?
In North Carolina.
Oh, okay.
Now, wasn't it here, I believe, if I'm thinking correct, that you ran across the first additional member of the Libbon household?
That's correct, on the Blue Ridge Parkway.
Oh, yes.
One of the prettiest drives next to the Highway 1 of California.
Mm-hmm.
They found the god of thunder in North Carolina.
They have these smoky mountains there because they're right alongside, and the hills look like they're on fire almost. And
they look like they're not on fire. They look like there's smoke because the clouds hang so low in them, and you were above them on this Blue Ridge Skyway. You're up so high that it looks like they're smoky, not so much on fire, and but it's just clouds. It's really pretty.
But yes, we almost ran over our addition to the family, Thor. We named him.
Mm-hmm. Turtle.
A little box turtle that we saw in the middle of the road and decided to rescue and carried him along with us the rest of the trip, and he remained in our family for some time.
Many
named
years.
him Thor, even though Thor was a woman.
Is Thor a woman?
Oh, you mean
the turtle
was, okay.
Oh, I thought he was a male.
And even though I wanted that name for you, but Mom said, no, we'll name the turtle Thor, not our first child.
You almost were a Thor. Thor Libbon.
Pretty hot commodity
Thor,
right now.
You have a Thor thumb? I can
The
just
next
hear it.
stop I remember making in that area was the town of Ashford.
Oh my
And
gosh.
touring the Biltmore Estates, which is the eastern coast equivalent of
Hertz Castle.
Hearst Castle.
It was beautiful. And again, I fell in love with the cows. They had the most beautiful cows there. That's where all the cows are, and it stinks. These cows, though, were brown. And the thing I remember the most is they're like in a barn, and you go up and pet them, and their tongue, they would lick you. And their tongues were so soft, and they had the prettiest eyes. They were beautiful cows.
White face?
No, brown.
Yeah, they were interesting color.
I've never seen
Dairy
such
cows.
beautiful cows in my life. Their
not
coat
Herefords.
was shiny. They taste good, but they smell horrible.
I've got a picture of Mom petting them and one of them licking her.
And I'm like going,
Good picture though, throw in there.
yeah. But yeah, that place was amazing. The grounds were unbelievable. The gardens were just, even the drive up to the house were all these trees.
And flowers that were famous
Gorgeous.
were the azaleas, weren't they? Azalea.
There was they had all different kinds of flowers. The garden was one of those, when you were up in the house and you could look down, you could see it was cut in a pattern, all the shrubs and everything, and they bloom and bloom. You have pictures of those. But this house was very modern for its time. It had indoor plumbing, including a shower, which was almost unheard of in those days. So that was really fun to see.
They had huge banquet rooms where you could walk into the fireplace. It was so big. And
Yeah, like Hertz Castle, very similar.
very fun times touring that. And then I remember us trekking southward through South Carolina and into Florida and the Florida coast on the east side, where we made our way down.
How far south did you go?
We didn't go all the way to Miami, but we went where we could take the highway west to Orlando. Our destination.
No,
was
going back,
Disneyland.
anything in South Carolina or just drive through?
No, we just drove through.
I remember going through Charleston because my boyfriend from high school, mother, was born and raised there. And this is our grandpuppy right here. I don't think you can see her.
No, you can't.
Oreo. How's my girl, huh? How's my girl?
And then the next stop, the big stop, was Orlando, where
We went to Disney
we
World.
went to Disneyland World, and Mom chewed out an employee because he was not what Walt Disney envisioned of the employees for Disney.
It was a female and she was very rude. It was in the parking lot. And I told her she didn't have good training because...
Well, the whole story is, first I believe it was a male, and you know how they direct you to parking spaces in Disneyland, and we were directed to a spot, and as we were getting out of the car, this attendant was in an argument with a customer who was parking his car, and we don't know what the argument was about, but Mother, because of her years of loyalty as a true blue employee
Disney
of
employee.
Disney, and Walt Disney even held her on her lap or something like that. His lap.
Patted me on my head.
I reached into his
Laid
pants
into
pocket.
this employee saying, Walt Disney would never allow that to happen. You should be ashamed of yourself, and you shouldn't be yelling in arguments with customers. And
Not customers.
I was-
Guests. They're not
Guests.
customers, they're
I was
guests.
just backing off saying, I don't know this woman. But
I
that
just
was-
told him that he wasn't he wasn't Disney quality.
And then we toured the park, of course, and we weren't as impressed with it as we were Disneyland because it was.
It wasn't
First of
as
all,
quaint.
Main Street was built to scale, whereas Main Street in Disneyland is 2/3 or 3/4 scale.
Yeah, but Disney World is what Disney actually envisioned for his park.
Right.
He's
Right.
limited in his space. In
Now you have to
California.
remember this was 1977. Now that area is so built up with all the other things around it.
Kingdoms.
The Epcot wasn't there when we toured. Universal Studios, all the water parks, none of that was there.
It's still
So-
all owned by.
right, and so it was just out there all by itself, and it just didn't. We had a good time, but it wasn't the quaintness that Disneyland was.
The castle was full scale, for instance.
And Main Street.
Well, maybe you're the one who didn't realize what Disney's vision was.
No, I did because
Quality.
they told you all that when you had to go to their little rah-rah meetings at Disneyland.
Right.
So I knew all that, but Disney hated the area around Disneyland. He hated all those little cheap hotels and stuff that went up. And so when they decided to build this one, they made sure they bought enough land that they could control the hotels around it. And that's why now at Disneyland, they have the 3 hotels right in the park.
Yeah.
And I remember the impression when we came to Disneyland, Disney World, and left. You had a choice after you left the parking lot, either to take the monorail into the park or take the ferry, paddleboard ferry into the park. And so we took the monorail into the park, which actually went through one or more of the hotels. And then when we left, we took the Mark Twain type, what kind of paddle boat?
It was just a ferry.
And I remember it got a gorgeous picture of the sunset with the Disney World, the background from that boat. Real nice picture. But those are 2 impressions I had also, Disney World. And then the next big adventure was the Love Bugs, which Mom can tell you about.
So you make your way back up into Alabama?
Well, no, backing up, when we left Disney
Oh, that's
World,
when.
we encountered the Love Bugs.
Oh,
we
my.
were told by the locals were part of Florida at that time of the year.
They're mating. That's why they're flying. They mate midair while they're flying. But there's so many of them that literally a half hour after driving out of Orlando area, we had to stop because we couldn't see out of our windshield anymore.
They were just swarms that you had to drive through. And the worst part of them was the stench.
They got into the vents because in the VW van, the vents were right in front, so we could smell them. Oh, it was awful.
And 3 or 4 car washes and watering out later, it still smelled. It took months to get that smell out of the car. But that's what I remember about Florida. Besides, it was very swampy as we went up the western coast of Florida.
See any alligators?
No.
No, but you know, about this time, it was starting into September. Labor Day was done. So most of the schools were back in session. So we were at the tail end of the summer at Disney World. And then when we started going on the Gulf Coast, all these little places that they had, you could tell, for families to come on the coast to vacation, and little playgrounds and little small amusement parks were all empty and deserted because everyone was back in school. So that was kind of nice because we didn't have crowds, but it was nice driving along the coast. The Gulf Coast was beautiful.
My last impression of that northwestern corner of Florida was how the trees were growing out of the swamps, the marshes, dead, but not growing, I guess. They were just fixated in there. And then we hit the Gulf Coast, and my big impression of that was how it went out a good half mile of only about a foot deep water where you could walk out there all the way, and long, remember that? Beaches. Then we hit,
That's what I was talking about.
Now
That
you're
was
in the
on the
deep
Gulf.
south.
And this
Now
was
we're in
the Gulf.
Alabama, and the next city we drove through that next day was Mobile. We went across the bridge in Mobile with all the Navy ships. It must be a Navy headquarters of some kind. There was a lot of big ships coming in from the Gulf Coast as well as military ships.
I remember those wood things coming out of the sand on those
We took
beaches.
pictures of, yeah.
We took pictures of it. It seemed like that it was so different from the coast, the Gulf, because the water stayed shallow for so far out, or if you want to say so far in.
Very profound of you to say that.
It was
Very
really
pretty.
Yeah.
Now we're in the deep south. Right?
So you're 2 young hippies from California in a VW van
In
going
the
through
South.
the deep south. Any situations like Easy Rider?
No,
No, we did have a lot of strange looks when they saw the license plate from California.
California, yeah.
And
But we didn't
VW
look like
van.
hippies, you know. We were pretty conservative in our attire and our hairdos and whatever.
I remember we stayed that night in a motel, I believe in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Yes, Biloxi. hmm
And then the next morning we were going to drive into New Orleans across Lake. I don't even want to try to say it's a real long name. It starts with a P-O-N-T, I think, Ponticello or something like that.
Pontchartrain.
Pontchartrain.
But it's famous for how long the bridge goes across this very shallow
Oh,
lake.
and near New Orleans?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
New Orleans.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I said going into New Orleans.
Oh, okay.
But we
Ponticello.
stopped before, what's the name of it?
Isn't it Ponticello? No,
I
I'm
don't
not
think
sure.
there's a K in it.
I'll have to look it up.
But in any case, we stopped before going that route because it was so friggin' scary looking. They were having a storm going there. And it was so dark, and we looked at each other, do we really want to drive into this? But we did, and it wasn't too bad.
I thought that was after we left New Orleans,
No, it was
It was going
strong
in?
deterrent whether
Oh.
we wanted to go in.
but I'm glad we went into New Orleans because that was a beautiful city and a trip. We got these drinks called Hurricanes.
We stopped and toured
And
around.
I'm telling you that you could just buy a drink and then take it and walk on the street with alcohol. It was like, that's legal there. And so
Bourbon Street. Was
and then you have that Hurricane, and I don't know how many types of alcohol it had in it, but
Lake Pontchartrain. Pontchartrain. So the big decision was whether to cross the bridge over Lake Pontchartrain into New Orleans.
Which we did. And as Mom was saying, we toured downtown New Orleans, Andrew Jackson Square and Bourbon Street. And she had the infamous Hurricane drink that threw for a loop. And the nice thing is you can walk around the city drinking, sort of like Las Vegas at Halloween. in that
Or
regard.
period.
At least on Bourbon Street you can do it. And back then they had the Superdome operational, now it's not. Then we left New Orleans, going back across that bridge north.
Now,
into
did you
the-
see anything else in New Orleans? Hold on a second. Did you visit any of the grave sites, any of the historical landmarks, anything like that?
Yeah, I
Or did you
think
just
we
drink
did.
Hurricanes?
No, we walked a lot down and up and down Bourbon Street and the related streets there and saw the main park.
well, the architecture was so impressive that just walking up and down the streets was. But there was some. Remember, there was those little. They had all those really beautiful buildings with all that wrought iron balcony stuff, and then in between two buildings was a little terrace area. Remember, they were so pretty.
We visited a lot of places, but I can't remember because of the hurricanes.
But yeah, we didn't spend a whole lot of time in New Orleans. We were getting towards the end of our trip.
Okay.
We're getting a little
We're
worn
getting a
out.
little tired.
In fact, after we left Louisiana, but leaving New Orleans, we went up the central New Louisiana and had to tour their city, Baton Rouge, because it was the state capital, and we wanted to compare it to all the other capitals like what we were doing on that trip. And then after we had lunch and spent some time around Baton Rouge, we headed west through Texas, and we zoomed. To recap on that, it was the
CB radio.
CB radio, which was completely foreign to us, the language of the truck drivers and another foreign language, and it took us pretty much all the way across the United States going east to understand it, and all the way back up until around Texas to feel comfortable talking back at the truck drivers as though we were one. And the pinnacle of our exposure to the CB radio, which we found to be invaluable. We found so many nice resting spots and parks and restaurants by simply asking the locals.
I think we talked about this earlier because when we first really were impressed with it was when we went into
Oregon.
well, yeah, when we asked them about the fog on the coast, but when we started through Idaho and we went into that one small town, that's when we first asked a local, we need a local, what's a good restaurant? And you know, they had us go to this nice mom and pop place with delicious
I
food.
think we did mention that before,
What
but
was
in any case,
some of the lingo you learned? They had their own
Smokey
language,
on the
correct?
side.
Meant
That-
there was a policeman. Smokey at the 422 marker.
right.
Smokies, and God, it's been a long time.
We had a handle. You were Captain Kirk, and I was
the
Spock.
nickname. Yeah, you had to have a handle.
And
our pinnacle, as I was going to say, is driving through Texas. We actually led a caravan. A caravan was a long line of trucks. They always stayed together with the front end looking out for Smokies and the back end looking out for Smokies.
front door and back door.
And we were able to be the front door. Captain Kirk and my sidekick Spock.
Said, "Take it away, Captain Kirk. You're the front door." And Papa was so proud. But we literally zoomed through Texas. I remember distinctly seeing Houston in the distance, and we just sort of went, "Oh, there's Houston," because it was south of the I-10.
Yeah.
And we were so pooped by then. We're anxious to get back to our new home. And
So no major
Arizona.
stops in Texas.
I think we went through
None.
El Paso. And
we spent the night in El Paso.
spent the night there. But that was about
In
the
the
major
parking lot
stop
somewhere.
we had. We didn't have any other city stops in Texas. And it took us a day and a half to drive through that friggin' state.
Anything in New Mexico?
No, we were anxious to get back to Arizona at this time. We had to get back to Arizona
Get the turtle in water.
because we had to stop there, make sure the house was okay because it had been empty for a couple months.
We just
And
purchased
then we
the
had,
house.
and then we went through all through that earlier, and then we had to go back to California to get all our stuff, which my parents were storing, and Huey was storing at the Oakwood Apartments, and move back. To
Oh wow! So you had to go on your road trip all the way back to LA and then back
Right,
to Arizona.
and so we
Okay, so and that's your trip, correct?
Yes. Yes, since we were the owners of the house that we still live in, and we were going right through Phoenix, we thought we'd stop and see how everything was, since it had been sitting empty for a couple months. So we stopped and we went in the house, of course no furniture, and we jumped in the pool to cool off because it was hot. It was September. And almost October, I believe, wasn't it?
The time was 3:45 p.m. Temperature.
I think it was more towards the beginning of October. But the neighbors, I guess, heard us in the pool, and they were all calling each other and saying, "Someone's in the new owner's pool," and blah blah. So finally, one of them came over, the lady Bonnie next door, and she rapped on the door, and we said, "Oh yeah, well we are the new neighbors, but we're just passing through. We're going to LA." So I don't remember if we slept on the floor in the house that night,
Or out in the van.
or out in the van. I don't think we slept out in the van, or we just drove all the way to LA that night. I can't remember. But then we went to LA, and Huey had been using part of the apartment to store our stuff, so we were paying him like a storage fee. So
We're paying part of the rent, I think. Still.
So the reason why I say that, because I'm pretty sure that from my recollection that it was in October. We stayed there a while with you, maybe even a week, and we went down. We finally got the U-Haul, and I arranged for my girlfriend Darlene, former roommate at CLU, Darlene Turner, to go with us because she happened to be not in school and unemployed at the time. And so we had to have another driver because we rented a U-Haul. We had our VW bus, and we had my B210 Datsun. So Papa drove the U-Haul, I drove the VW van, and Darlene drove the Datsun. But before that, we stayed for about a week with Huey. We packed up everything there at Huey's that we had, and then we went down to my mom and dad's, and we packed up everything there and put it in the U-Haul and left, the three of us.
And the day we left, I can remember it was an ozone alert in LA, and we thought it was very fitting. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
That we were leaving that town on the day that they're having a pollution alert. That's what an ozone alert is.
And the visibility in Phoenix was like, at that time, was like 70 miles or something. But
not so much anymore.
Not so much anymore, correct. So then we drove through the desert and got to our house, and of course we had no furniture, so we were young though, and we could blow up mattresses and sleep on the ground, no problem.
Any interesting stories moving in?
I remember that Darlene stayed for a while with us, maybe a week or so, and the house was in pretty good shape, and the lady cleaned it up really nicely. But there was some, scrapes on the walls and stuff. And so we went to Sherman-Williams, which was the closest paint store, and we got a little off-white paint. Just so happens it must have been the exact same paint that was put on our walls, because we tried a little area, and we ended up just having to go around and get all the little scratch marks, and the walls looked like they had all been painted. So that was pretty nice. But here we were in a 4-bedroom house, and we had like a couch.
I don't remember even having a couch.
I remember that Darlene loaned us a mattress that used to be her brother's that we brought over. So we had that, and she must have slept on something like that too. And we had no furniture really. No table. I think we had a couch we brought, if that. So, we got along for a while with the minimum. We didn't have furniture in the living room for years, as you know. Kind of turned into your playroom when you came along with the tents and all that.
And moving on.
So moving on.
That's my job.
Right. So then we had to go look for jobs, of course. And Darlene went home. She flew. She must have flown back, and we got on with our lives and started looking for jobs. And I got a job at the bank.
Which bank?
At the time, it was Valley National Bank. It's now Chase Bank. And Papa went to work for Nicotella and
Bob Clear.
Bob Clear.
Actually.
I didn't start till after Thanksgiving. So Papa's parents came out for Thanksgiving, and that was really nice.
You're jumping ahead.
I'm in November.
Okay.
I'm not that much ahead. I'm just saying that they hired me on, but they had me start after Thanksgiving, so I still had all that Thanksgiving with his parents there. They always took Thanksgiving, 2 weeks of Thanksgiving, because where Vince's mom worked, she got holidays plus her birthday, and her birthday was November 29th. So usually she could take 2 weeks and only take 7 days vacation for 2 weeks, because she had her birthday in there too.
And so what position did you have at the bank?
Was a teller.
A teller? Oh, no wonder you like playing banker and Monopoly.
And that was a funny part too, because when I worked at Disneyland, we handled so much money and stuff, and had so much more really responsibility. At the bank, they watch you like a hawk. It's sort of funny.
So maybe less oversight, you're saying, at Disneyland?
You still had to balance out, but you handled a large amount of money. At the bank, they would only allow you to have so much money in your drawer. You had to keep it back. If you ever got audited right then and there, and you had more than a certain amount in your drawer, you were in big trouble. You'd get written up, because if you got too much money, you're supposed to take a break and take it back to the vault, to your little extra money area.
Okay.
So. And
how did you end up with
Niall Smith?
Yeah.
I met Niall through Bob and Nick Catilla.
Oh, who's Niall Smith?
Excuse me, you didn't work for Niall Smith first.
I didn't work for Niall at all.
You were working for Bob, and at this time, what we're talking about, this time in our life, we're talking about Bob Clear and
Nicotilla.
And Nicotilla. You went to work for them as a clerk.
Thank you. Then when I started practicing law, I started with Niall Smith because he was friends of both of them, and I met him through them.
You're jumping ahead a year, though.
So, yes, backing up. So you worked as a clerk?
Well, he didn't have his.
Oh, you hadn't passed the bar yet?
Well, he hadn't got his results yet.
I got the results yet. Gotcha.
So
Okay.
he went to work for Bob and Nick Clear, and I think you met them through that priest, didn't you? Or he introduced you to them through the priest? He knew Nick Catella or something? And you contacted them? You worked for them as a paralegal, if you want to call it, or a law clerk,
Okay.
someone who could do work for them without having a law degree, a law license yet. Right? How did you meet them? Do you remember?
No, I don't. I thought it was just looking for a job ad.
It took a long time.
It wasn't really Nick, it was Bob Clear.
Tell me about that process then.
It takes a long time to get the results of the bar exam. So I went to work for the bank and he worked for them, and that went on for just a few months. And then when we eventually got the results that he had passed, then they couldn't afford him anymore. Let's put it that way. So they introduced him to Niall because Niall needed some help from a young upstarting attorney. So he went to work for Niall then.
Niall Smith. Okay, not out of the office where you worked for so many years then.
It was on Central.
And
Central and Dunlap.
Mm-hmm.
On the northeast corner, half a block from the corner.
He didn't even have a window.
oh,
All I did was share office space with Niall
Mm-hmm.
and helped him with some of his cases while trying to build up my practice.
and what kind of law were you practicing at that time?
Pretty much everything, because most of my cases or clients would come through Penny Saver Ads, which was a local advertising newspaper
Mhm.
that you'd have to pay for, of course, and a lawyer referral service through the Maricopa County Bar, where they would refer clients to you and you'd agree to see them for free consultation. And sometimes it created work that way. But what sustained us, at least from my law practice during that time, was Niall needed help with his criminal law practice, which was what he was doing primarily. So at that time I was even doing criminal law.
And how long did that last? 78? Or how many months did you work there, or years?
I think about a year, wasn't it, honey? Then
Yeah, and
The
then
next
what
step
happened was, yeah, he was kind of tired of. You didn't like the criminal law at all, and you didn't like the people that it.
I felt weird getting paid cash all the time.
Yeah. So there was another attorney. How did you meet Mike Blasnick?
And it was too, if I can go backwards,
Okay.
it was too redundant. Like 90% of your cases you ended up settling because of the crimes. We were representing defendants and they would offer a plea bargain always, 90% of the time. So you ended up going to a couple preliminary hearings and meeting with the prosecutor and accepting the plea bargain. After about half a dozen times it became rote. There wasn't much to it. It was good money, but it wasn't much to it. So then the next step was I thought, and I could be mixing up, going with Bob Clear on Peoria Avenue before I went with Blasnick, but I could be wrong.
You did what?
I think Blasnick was next, yeah, now that I think of it.
Before what? I didn't hear what you
The
were
next
saying.
step from Niall Smith.
Right. So,
I'm not sure how I met Blasnick, maybe just like you meet most attorneys down at court.
so he, all of a sudden, Papa says to me, well, I got a chance to go work with this other young attorney. We'll share expenses. Now that he had a little clientele built up. So that's when he worked at 35th and Cactus. And they moved in and share office expense.
And Bob Clear was still there, and Nick Catella also had his own separate practice there, all in this 35th and Cactus building,
Oh, that was before they moved then?
Yes.
right behind Moon Valley High School.
And you practiced with Blasnick for maybe half a year, 6 months, and then things weren't going very smoothly anymore with him. He was
Unscrupulous.
very unscrupulous. It made Papa very uncomfortable. to be practicing with him, even though they weren't partners. It bothered him so.
And I should say at this time that Bob Clear and Nick Attila were very influential in my law profession because they were so helpful and such nice people. They went out of their way to help me, and law is such that you graduate from law school and it's like 3 different professions. One is the law you learn in law school, and 2 is the law you learn to study and pass the bar exam, and third aspect is when you actually go out to practice, which is nothing like the other 2. So a new attorney always has to lean on somebody to learn the system and how you do things, from getting clients, sustaining clients, to actually going down to court and dealing with the nuances of that. And Bob Clear and Nick Attila were so helpful and such nice people that, and they even referred over work to me, or asked occasionally if I wanted to go on a case with them. And that continued for at least the first couple of years, but I'm jumping ahead. But yeah, Mike Blasting, it soon became obvious. He was coincidentally from Wisconsin, and recently married.
I thought it was Michigan.
No, Wisconsin.
Okay.
Both he and his wife, and just would cut corners and do unethical stuff, and it bothered me so.
So at the time, Bob was moving into a new office, and you were telling him what was going on, and he says, "Why don't you just leave and come and share office space with me?"
Right.
And so we had to break our lease, and that was another thing. We ended up having to pay the lease for the rest of the year, even though we tried to find someone to take over the place, but no one, we couldn't. So we ended up biting the bullet on that one, but it was worth it, and especially to get in with Bob Clear and everything. So
and he had a nice office right there on 31st Avenue on Peoria, looking out towards Peoria. And Nick Attila at the same time had moved in the office right across the hallway.
correct. So there was, and then there was Bruce Alper, who was down the hall. So there was all those mentors you had. And then shortly after that, Joe was getting fed up with his law practice he had gone to work for after Joe Causey, after passing the bar, and because they kept promising to make him a partner, and they never did. So Vince said, "We got an extra office space. Why don't you come over?" So that's when
Joe leased office space, and the
so
3 of us practiced there with
Right.
Nick across the hallway.
yeah.
Did I even talk about Joe before, how we met in law school?
Not too much, no. Why don't you go into it?
He and I had met in law school, a particular class we had together, and I was thinking already then about moving to Arizona, and through our friendship I discovered he was from Arizona, Douglas, down at the border, and he had gone to U of A undergrad and undergrad, and had come out west to Southwestern to the same law school I went to in LA. So with us thinking of going to Phoenix, we had a lot in common. And in fact, Joe was the one that was basically telling us where to buy a home and where not to buy a home. So we kept up close contact, of course, when we moved over here.
And you took the bar with him too.
Yeah, we're close friends. He was probably my closest professional friend over here.
And still is.
Nick and Bob are older than I was, so I was probably closer to Joe.
Joe's like maybe a year younger than you are.
So then fast forwarding, like Mom said, he ended up leaving the little firm that he started off practicing with to learn the ropes, and wanted to go out on his own, so he leased space from Bob Clear, pretty much like I was doing. I was helping Bob with overflow work again, but at the same time trying to build up my practice.
So they were 3 in the same office, but with basically 3 separate law practices. So that went on for a while, and then the next thing we knew, maybe a year after that, meanwhile I'm still working at the bank.
When did you work for the school?
Wait, by then I might have left the school. I think I worked for the bank for maybe, see, I went to work at the end of 77, 78, 79. I think it was somewhere in 79. I'm trying to think if I was working at the bank when Huey lived with us. I think I was still working at the bank. Yes, I was. I was still working at the bank in '79, and Huey decided they were laying off people at Rockwell.
Mm-hmm.
And he was hoping to get laid off because he wanted to take a chance while he was young to try something different
Mm-hmm.
and be his own boss, so to speak. So he decided he wanted to get into real estate because, of course, just before that, the real estate market was going through the roof and you could make a lot of money. So,
In California, you mean?
well, everywhere.
Everywhere, okay.
But especially in Arizona.
What year was this?
79, maybe.
70, I think it was like the end of 78, I want to say, because he went back to California, I think in 80. So, and he lived with us for a couple of years.
And he got into real estate,
So
got his
he
real estate
got his real
license.
estate license and lived with us, and it was fun having him back in our life. And he, the late 70s, the market went into the toilet.
Well, plus he wasn't cut out to be a realtor. You have to be somewhat cutthroat, and that wasn't Huey's nature. He was just too nice and wasn't assertive or aggressive enough. I think that didn't help him either.
Yeah. So the Three Musketeers were back living together. Huey was trying to make a go of it in real estate. I was working at the bank, and this time I was working at the one just down the street, so I could come home for lunch or whatever. And you were working at just down the road in Peoria in the law office. And on our free time, we had a lot of fun. You guys hiked the Grand Canyon, and we all went up to Monument Valley for a trip. And Huey wanted to see the state, and we wanted to see the state. And we even made a couple trips to Vegas. I know one time we met your parents up there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when we started playing Pong too. We got an Atari game, or was that after Huey?
No, that was the
when
time.
Huey was there. And so Atari just...
So don't jump. You go stay with Huey.
I stay with Huey. Well, he was part of that. We got the Atari game, and that was a big entertainment in the evenings at our house, playing Atari.
Okay.
So, and barbecuing, swimming. We didn't have you. Huey wasn't attached. He had a series of girlfriends while he was living with us, but none of them were the right girl.
Mm-hmm. Backing up, you're talking about some of the areas you went to, travel, especially scenic picture stuff. Talk about that a little more.
Well, the Grand Canyon trip was just Huey and I. Mom didn't go. And we trained for it just like you and I did. And we had a great time. Back then you took rolls of film. It wasn't digital. And we must have taken 20, 30 rolls of film, pictures. It was just a wonderful time. Just he and I taking our time going down. We camped at Phantom Ranch like we did. And we went down Kaibab and came back up Bright Angel. And just had a great time photo shooting the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And likewise Monument Valley, which back then, unlike now, you could actually go out into the valley. I think now they actually don't allow you to go out into the valley. You have to take a tour bus out there because they don't want you tromping around. But the three of us went to Monument Valley. You remember, you want to talk about that funny incident? This was while Huey was living with us, before he moved over to the Bay Area, and the three of us went off on another photo trek, traveling about Arizona. And this time it was to the Monument Valley, which, as I had previously said, it was different from how it is now, in the fact that you could go out on your own into the valley without getting any kind of authorization or pass. So we had our VW van, and the three of us slept in the van. Huey and I wanted to catch the sunrise over the teacups, the particular rock structure, the mitts they call them, right? But they look to us like teacups. So we had set the alarm to get up early and get our cameras all set up on tripods and everything. And we woke up in the morning, and Huey rushed out of there to get his tripod, and I started to go, and Mama wasn't feeling well. She had the runs, so to speak, and I spent the morning missing the sun come up over the teacups, holding Mom in a position so that she could
release her bowels.
Yeah, I guess that's the nicest way to see it. And all I can remember is seeing the teacups come up over the mittens and Huey over there.
Teacups come over the mittens.
see the sunrise come up over the mittens. While Huey was there with his little tripod saying, "Oh, it's so great, oh, it's so great." And I'm sitting there holding Mom in a toilet position so she could...
It was snow on the ground.
Yeah, that was the other thing. And
So
it wasn't just once, it was 2 or 3 times.
I was so sick.
So that was my
terrible.
funny remembrance. Although we continued during that day and she was better and we got a lot of fabulous shots in the Monument Valley.
He always liked to tell he missed the sunrise because Mama had the runs. He had a slew of girlfriends while he was living there, and once again our relationship was the same. He's like my brother, and I give him advice, and I could tell none of these were the one because they just weren't. But he enjoyed himself. And
you brought up Pong, which is a video game revolution of its time. Was the reason you brought that up with Pong and Uncle Huey?
Because when he was living with us is when we got our first Atari.
And was he like some kind of savant with the video games or what?
No, in fact, it was very competitive among the 3 of us. We would play not just Pong, but the other Atari games that they first came out with, and we'd even keep a score tablet with the different games and who had the best score for each game. We really enjoyed playing the Pong.
Pong started it, but then they started adding new games that you could play, and I think our favorite was River Raid.
Yes.
River
We
Raid
played a
and
lot of
Mr.
River Raid.
Talk about River Raid a little bit, because I doubt your grandchildren will have any idea what this is.
Well, it was one of the first, and you can still play it now with one of those games. They've sort of brought some of those nostalgic games back, but you're basically a ship, and you're trying to get through all these canals, and there's
Actually,
and you
you're
want
an
to.
airplane jet.
Oh, that's right. You are an airplane, and you have to bomb all these ships below you. Well, you don't have to bomb them all, but you have to bomb them to get points, and you can't run into them. That's why you run into them, I thought, and then you die. You're not an airplane.
You can either avoid objects on the board or hit them, and when you hit them and struck them with your jet shooter, then you accumulated points in life and you could sustain yourself. And each segment had a dam or a wall that you had to blast through to get to the next one, and it increasingly became more difficult as these boats and opposite jets and helicopters would come at you or be fixed on the board. You'd have to either shoot them or avoid them and not get shot and continue progressing. It was a very fun game that became even more tense the farther you got into it, because you'd have to have quicker and quicker reactions to get further on.
And talk a little bit about Miss Pac-Man then.
Pac-Man or
Miss Pac-Man?
You know, that was a little later, after Huey had left. They came out with Miss Pac-Man, which we enjoyed more than Mr. Pac-Man because it was more
But may I say something? It wasn't an Atari game.
Right.
You had to play it in a bar or something.
Game.
It was an arcade game. So we found a place at I-17 in Bell that was a Denny's that had, back then some of the Denny's had bars in them, little cocktail lounges, and they had a happy hour there where if you ordered a drink, you got to eat their hors d'oeuvres, and right in the middle of the room was a Miss Pac-Man game. So a couple times a week we'd go there and get happy hour. And
Well, the timing was the key, because you'd want to get there when no one else was around to bug you, and we get our happy hour discounted drinks and have the hors d'oeuvres there as well. And it was actually a booth almost like where we could sit and play the game, a real nice game as far as being set up and sit down and play, similar to the way we're sitting at this table, except Mom would be opposite side and the Miss Pac-Man game would be in the middle.
right, and was it we took turns or did we play against each other? Do you remember?
I think it alternated. You'd play 2 players, and you'd both be competing against Ms. Pac-Man.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. You just take turns.
Anyway, that was a fun time too. A little thing we did before you came along that we'd have fun doing if we wanted to. I mean, it wasn't like we did it all the time. It was just a when I had
Mostly
the time.
Friday evenings because, you know, the week was over and they had hard hors d'oeuvres there, so it was like eating, you know. A couple young
Appetizers.
people with no money. You just buy one drink and you could eat all that food and then play with a few quarters, play Miss Pac-Man. So it was a cheap, fun evening for two newlyweds that were on a budget.
We enjoyed our time playing, the three of us, those video games I can remember playing, among other stuff that we always did. We had a lot of fun together.
Well, Huey stayed with us and moved. What happened was the housing market went in the toilet, and he wasn't the type of personality really to be aggressive realtor. So his parents helped him out, and I think they finally said enough's enough. So he had some in. He applied. He had 2 offers from California to go back into engineering, both in the Bay Area, one at Lockheed and one at Moffett Ames Research. So he debated and debated. Lockheed had offered more money, blah, blah, blah. But when he talked to people, he found out that they did, but he had better chance for advancement with
Ames
Research. And it was better, it was more secure because you're the government and people are trying to kiss your butt instead of working for Lockheed and trying to kiss the government's butt to give you a contract. So he liked that idea too. So he went to work for Ames Research, Moffett Field, and that was a sad day when he moved back to California because that was the end of an era, so to speak. Era.
And what year did you go down the Grand Canyon?
Well, it would have been probably 1980.
And what other jobs were you working through this time? Did we get into that?
Well, I stayed at the bank for, I think by then, I worked at the bank for a couple of years.
I think backing up, the first job you held in Arizona was working for the school through your...
No, I worked for the bank. My very first job was at 19th and Peoria, and I worked there about a year, and then I transferred to the one at 43rd and Olive, which was just around the corner from our house, so that was nice and close. I was working there when Huey lived with us, and then about the time Huey was getting ready to leave, Papa was doing better in his law practice, and I was getting tired of working at the bank. And what happened was I had my first surgery then, because I was pregnant, and we thought, well, this is the start of our family. And it was shortly after Huey left, and the doctor didn't really want to see me till I was at least 2 or 3 months pregnant. So I was just hanging out, and I got severe pains and started bleeding and this and that, and we went into the doctor, and he met us actually in the emergency, and that was when I had my first miscarriage. That's right.
I think you're jumping ahead. The question was, when did you go down the canyon? Which, to answer
the question is, what other jobs did you have at that time?
So I'm thinking of that. I think when I had that miscarriage when I was working at 19th and Peoria. Then when I went to work at 43rd and Olive, I got pregnant again, and that's the time when I went in just thinking I was going to have an exam that I was pregnant, and when he examined me, he thought I had a tubal pregnancy. So he called his associate in, and he agreed. They both examined me physically and said, we think this is a tubal pregnancy, so you're going to have surgery, because otherwise the tube can burst and you could die. So I had changed gynecologists, so that I had just gone to see him as a brand new patient that day at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 1:30 I was in surgery with this doctor that I just met that day.
And what year was this?
This was about it might have been 80 or 81.
Okay.
And then, or maybe yeah.
Was it before or after Huey got married in 81?
That's what I was trying to think. I'm not sure. That's why. It was around 80, 81.
Because we flew over there for the wedding, if that helps.
No, we drove over for the wedding.
Okay. Good.
But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We're talking about my jobs. So when I had that surgery, I took a medical leave from the bank at 43rd and Olive. And it got to the point where my medical leave was coming up, and was I going to go back to work?
Mm-hmm.
And I was sick of working for the bank, and they didn't pay very well. So I got a job. I started applying other places, and I got a job at the school district, working with, it was kind of in my area. It was working with emotionally handicapped children, 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And I was an aide for one of the teachers. And I worked there a couple of years, and that was fun, strange, and I met a couple, that's where I met Nancy Petrides. And I worked there, and I enjoyed that. And it was only like maybe 30 hours a week instead of the 40 I was doing. So.
And I'm not sure whether I could interject the back in time incident, but while she was at 19th in Peoria, she met...
What's 19th in Peoria?
The Valley National Bank. She met a person who we became close friends with, she and her husband. Is that wrong to bring that up now?
No, that's fine. Who was that?
Barbara and Raymond Darling. We became friends with her, and also my immediate boss, Virginia Schmidt. She was friends with them too, and so we all kind of became friends. And we'd hang out, and they'd come over and swim, and we'd have barbecues, and we'd go to their house and do stuff.
They became our closest friends here in Arizona.
During that time.
Even through your birth.
That was after Huey left.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say that before you went too far in the future.
Well, we were friends with them while Huey was there, but we didn't spend as much time. After Huey left, they sort of filled that void, and we did more things with them.
So how many years did you work at the bank then?
A couple years total.
Okay. And before we jump ahead, some significant events at that time. You'd mentioned already the economy going in the toilet. Want to talk about that and how it happened a little bit, what was going on political scene-wise?
It was the late 70s, and I think Jimmy Carter was president.
Yes.
And it was just a bad time economically, like the country's gone through up and down through the years. The housing market went bad. Interest rates did the opposite. It was like no one had any money, so if you had a savings account, some of the interest rates were 10%. On some of the CDs back then when I worked at the bank. It was just like, wow.
Raising of oil prices by OPEC that did it, I believe.
Yes, gas prices went up. I know working at the bank, I guess I was more attuned to the interest rates, because we had customers that came in that actually wanted to close a CD. And if you closed a CD early, you were penalized by the bank. Say you had a 5-year CD, they'd come in, take the penalty, and reopen it, because the interest rate had gone up so much that they were willing to take the penalty. It was worth it to them. They were getting like maybe 4 or 5%, and all of a sudden the banks were paying 10%. So.
Are you guys still hippies at this time, just looking for a good time, not really paying attention to anything? Is that why there's such a little being said here?
Yeah.
No, it's probably because it's such a long time ago that we have trouble remembering. I don't know if we were hippies then. I was pretty professional.
Yeah,
attorney.
We weren't really hippies. We were just what you call dinks. Do you know what dinks are? D-I-N-K. Double income, no kids. So, we worked and played. That's what we did.
Gotcha.
And when we came along, we couldn't play any longer.
Yeah, that all ended.
1980 election, anything about that memorable for you guys?
No.
I believe it was Jimmy Carter.
Reagan and Jimmy Carter election, nothing about that?
I don't even think I voted. I hate to say.
Weren't surprised to see a Hollywood actor be running for president? Anything like that? Thoughts like that?
I'm thinking Carter was in office in 80.
No.
wasn't he?
No.
No. Because what
He was elected in 1976.
Mm-hmm. And he wasn't reelected.
Okay.
He was a
right
one-term.
before, and Reagan was 80.
Yeah.
Reagan was 80, and that's when just not to jump ahead, but the way I remember the 80s was greed.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit.
That's the best word I can think of for the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It was, everyone was out for themselves, everyone was screw everybody else as long as I make a lot of money, and everybody was into material things, the hottest car, the biggest house, and and cocaine.
And cocaine. Well, thank you for summarizing the 80s. You guys have some interesting perspectives from some of the Olympics at that time that are probably worth mentioning as well.
Well, backing up to 1976 is when the infamous or famous Bruce Jenner won the decathlon, or AKA Caitlyn Jenner.
Before Caitlin's transition, when she won.
Yes. Before she was Caitlyn Jenner, she was Bruce Jenner, and she won the decathlon.
And then because of Jimmy Carter, the Americans boycotted the Summer Olympics in 1980, which were held in Moscow, because we were angry at the Russians at the time. Why were we angry?
Who knows? We're always at war with them, it seems like.
Maybe to do with the Iran conflict?
Cold War. But we did have the Winter Olympics that year. That was, back in those days, the Olympics were the same year. The Winter and the Olympics were always the same year. I forget when they started alternating them.
Not important.
Right. But so we had the Winter Olympics in February, and then...
The importance of the Winter Olympics was the famous Miracle on Ice. The Russian hockey team was so famous at that time. They practiced year-round, and they recruited all from Russia, whereas the Americans weren't really into hockey that much, and their players are a handful of college stars at small schools who happen to still play hockey as a college sport, like in Minnesota or New England, which was the restriction on it. No one else played hockey in America. And the Russians practiced year-long and were state-funded, and they're very powerful, and they came over to the 1980 Olympics looking to sweep, and for some reason the American kids played together as a team and got all the way to the finals against the Russians, where everyone would predicted it was going to be a giant blowout, and lo and behold, the Miracle on Ice occurred, and they upset the Russians, and all the Russian hockey players were later killed when they went back to Russia. Firing squad, if I remember correctly.
I don't think so.
Probably.
That was probably the propaganda that was told, but no.
I'm just kidding. Just joking.
No. But
anyway, then the next Olympics, I don't know why we're going to.
They made a movie about it. So if you want to know about that, you can watch the movie. I'm not sure what the title is. Maybe it's Miracle on Ice. I think, what's his face is in that? Actor you like.
What's his face? Never forget old what's his face.
You know, the Goldie Hawn's husband, boy.
Kurt Russell.
Kurt Russell. Kurt Russell plays, I think, the coach, doesn't he? In that.
And I think the reason they got the title was because of the famous exclamation from the announcer, American announcer at the time, doing the countdown as the time the clock ran down to zero, and the first thing that came out of his mouth when it hit zero and we actually won the game was, "Do you believe in miracles?"
Mm-hmm. You believe in miracles. And then they were all cheering and everything, and the one thing that stood out to everyone was the biggest player on the team, I think he was the goalie, wasn't he? And he turned around after jumping around a little bit, and you could read his lips. He turned around and he says, "Where's my father? Where's my father?" Remember, and he was looking up at the stands because he wanted to find his father after that moment. That really...
These were a bunch of 20, 21-year-old college kids from remote little schools who stood up against these men who had played hockey since they were 10 years old, and
we're really a professional
late
team.
20s and 30s. And
back then we weren't allowed to send professionals to the Olympics, but all these other countries had professional teams.
But anyway, that's the Miracle on Ice of 1980.
That was big news.
And very good. Anything else? Anything else you're going to talk about? 84? Jumping ahead a little bit?
Jump ahead to the Olympics in 84.
That's fine.
That was held in America, and it was
Los Angeles.
One of the few, and if not only, Olympics that were actually successful financially. And Los Angeles actually benefited made money on the deal, so to speak. And of course it was boycotted by the Russians and some of the communist countries who banded together, because we had boycotted the Russians in 1980 Olympic. And it was famous more so for that because of the stellar performances from the American athletes. It was like they rose to the occasion. There was a young school teacher from New England area who won the women's cross country, which was renowned as a foreign dominant sport. And I remember watching her run the freeways in Los Angeles. Do you remember her name? She was just a little bitty thing, but she beat all the big names. Then Carl Lewis was the big hero of track and field. I believe he won 3 gold medals and a silver, and dominated that event. And
he won 3 gold medals in silver.
3 golds and a silver.
And a silver.
And
he was like the long jump and the
sprints and the relays. And we had a young high school kid who won or came close to winning. I believe he won the high jump, Dwight Stones, who went on to bigger and better things as being perhaps the best track and field announcer ever.
Very informative.
Aside from setting the high jump record that lasted for a while. But
and the gymnast, the female gymnast, was Mary Lou Retton.
And they upset the Romanians thanks to Mary Lou.
She hit a 10 with a broken foot on the horse. She had the guts of any big football player.
So it was like a magical Olympics with so many special moments, I guess it was. I know we were just glued to it, watching it as much as we could. And
something else happened in 1984, just before the Summer Olympics. What was that? Something really special in our lives.
But they're jumping ahead.
Okay, so then back we're now up to Huey's wedding, I would guess.
So, do you want us to jump back to Huey now?
Yeah, is that the next logical step to go forward?
Well, before he got married, did we talk about how the 5 of us hiked the Grand Canyon? I believe we never got back to that. So.
Well, is that the next thing then?
Yeah, before he got married. He came over with his frat brother that he was living with, Deuce, and Deuce's wife, Barbara. And
the 5 of us hiked the Grand Canyon, and the interesting thing, there's a couple interesting things on that trip, was it's warmer, it's towards the bottom of the Grand Canyon, it's warmer like it is in Phoenix. So as we got to the bottom, we were tired and thirsty, and we were saying, oh, we can't wait for a nice cold beer. And even though we were camping, they had a little place where you could reserve certain meals, and we just got...
And they had an open bar.
And we had...
While the liquor lasted.
No, they didn't have an open bar.
Yeah, not an open bar, but a place where you could...
Buy
you didn't have to
booze.
have tickets. You could go up and buy beer, or... That's all they had, beer.
Right. No, they had beer and wine. They had beer and wine and snacks, and you could reserve meals. Like we reserved like lunch the next day and stuff, sack lunch, because we wanted to do some more hiking. But we got down there and we're so ready for a cold beer. We go up to the snack bar thing. We're out of beer, but we do have wine. Well, when it's 90, 100 degrees and you've hiked down, you don't want wine. And we go, oh, never mind. So we went to sit our feet in the little creek and cool off.
More than our feet, we literally sat in the
And it
creek,
was nice and
tributary going from the Colorado River.
okay. Anyway, we were sitting in the creek or near the creek or whatever, and we're sitting there enjoying ourselves. And all of a sudden, Huey goes, "Well, I have this right here," and he pulls out of his backpack, which he's toted all the way down to the bottom of the canyon, a big 1.75 liter of tequila. And I'm telling you, that was the best tequila I ever had in my life, because passed it around and we took sips and you could just feel your muscles relaxing.
And that was the image I remember, sitting almost waist high in that creek, and it was so cool, staring back up at the Grand Canyon where we had just come down and passing that big tequila bottle among the 5 of us.
He saved us.
He saved our lives.
He saved us. Not our lives, but he saved us.
Our muscles.
Saved our muscles. So, then another interesting story is
that night.
So we had these sack lunches, and there's these signs all around the campground to hang your backpacks. They have these ropes, much like you have up here, and they say, except heavier
They can't
duty.
see that.
Okay, except they're heavier duty. And they said, hang your backpacks and hang your belongings over there, because the raccoons come down and they'll get in stuff. So we all of us followed the rules except one person. So we
biggest non-rule follower of all time.
Yes. So we hung our backpacks up, but Papa here says, you know what? I'm going to use mine for a pillow. It's going to be under my head. No raccoon's going to get in my backpack. So we said, okay, fine. But the interesting thing was, sleeping that night, I could feel them running across our sleeping bags. So they were all around, but you're so
You
tired.
weren't worried about them being rabid and biting you?
We
No.
didn't know what they were running across.
Well,
I think
I
it was
ass-
squirrels or chipmunks or
But
anything.
because it was nighttime, it was probably raccoons, but I'm telling you, I was so tired and exhausted, I didn't really care. So, and I barely remembered. I was so out of it, so to speak. So the next morning we get up and we're going to hike to Libbon Falls, which I'm told is just practically flat all the way there. Well,
It was about an hour hike.
in fact, you have to go over what they call Asinine Hill, and one of the guides down there told us, you know why it's called Asinine Hill? Because there's no asinine reason for it being there. But anyway, after we hiked about an hour, I turned around and looked, and we're not on flat ground. We're obviously...
Well, can I back up? That
Incline,
wasn't a very good
incline,
explanation of
incline.
Asinine Hill. It was called Asinine Hill. It wasn't a guide. It was another hiker there. She said, it's called Asinine Hill because there's no reason for the trail to go up the hill when it could have gone around it just as easily.
Okay, maybe
That's why
that's
it was-
true. There's no asinine reason for the path to go over the hill. That's probably a better thing. But I remember she had little green shorts on and a little green top. She was somehow connected to the canyon. She wasn't just a hiker, in my
Maybe she wasn't
recollection.
connected to the mob.
And I don't recall well enough. She might have been. I don't know. I didn't.
So on with this story, because it's not over with the raccoons yet. So about halfway up to Libbon Falls, we're all ready for lunch. And so we say, okay, let's stop and have our sandwiches. So everyone reaches into their backpack, and when Papa pulls his out, they were in little brown bags, and his bag was torn on the side, and half of
Chewed through.
chewed through. You could see it was chewed through, and half of the sandwich was gone. So while he was asleep, with the backpack under his head, the raccoon got in his backpack and took half of his sandwich. And what I've read about raccoons since then, that doesn't surprise me. They're very intelligent and they're very resourceful. So he starts saying, oh, anybody going to share their sandwich with me? And we were all like, we hung our backpacks up. We're not going to share with you. But I think we all gave you some of our sandwich. I don't remember, but that was so funny. We laughed and laughed and laughed about that.
And Libbon Falls was an hour and a half hike, and it was worth it going towards the opposite end of the canyon, and the same trail that you would take if you're going to climb out of the canyon. And it was 50-foot high falls that actually came higher than that, but 50-foot mark had a place that you could walk up or hike up behind Libbon Falls and actually
Be behind them.
be behind the falls.
And swim in the pond there, and it was just beautiful. And the whole where the fall comes down, it comes over this rock, and the rock is just full of all this green moss. It's just so beautiful. Well, you've seen it.
So anyway, we
What am
had
I
a fun
talking
time
about?
with the Deuce and Barbara, and
So then when we hiked out, it was, when we get back to Phoenix, we're going to go to Garcia's and get margaritas. And that's what kept my feet going. So we hike out of the canyon, and I just kept thinking, margarita, margarita, margarita. So we get in the car, we drive back to Phoenix, everybody hops in the shower, we get out, and I'm starting to hear this, well, do you really want to go have margaritas? Why don't we just sit around here? And I said, no. I got out of that canyon so I could have a margarita. We're going for margaritas. And we said, okay. So off we went and we had margaritas.
Why didn't you stop someplace in Flagstaff for margaritas?
We were gross. We wanted to get home and showered.
We didn't want to drive inebriated.
Yes, we wanted to get home, get cleaned up, and it felt so good.
We didn't want to drive as far inebriated. It was only from 35th and Peoria to 43rd, as opposed from Flagstaff to Phoenix. But we didn't really drive. The driver wasn't inebriated.
No, we didn't get drunk. We just had to drink. It just felt so good on those sore muscles. So I don't even like margaritas nowadays, but I did back then. So then,
years 1980 to 1984. The significant event.
The next event was Huey's wedding.
We went to California.
The date was.
Well, I have to tell this first. We have to tell about how meeting Lori, having all these girlfriends and always talking to me about him and stuff. So he met Lori at work, and he wanted us to meet her, and we were going to be in Santa Maria. This was the year before they got married. And so he said, I think they even came down for a high school reunion, for Huey's high school reunion. So we happened to be there the same time. And so they come over, and we're all going to go out to the beach and have a picnic. So it's Huey and Lori and Vince and I, and we just meet her for the first time. We go out to the beach, and it's just much like you and your lovely bride, Randy. I knew right away this was the one, just by the way he was around her. He was so sweet with her and calling her babe and all this. And I never heard him talk that way to a girl before. And so I told Papa when we got alone, I said, this is the one that Huey's going to marry. Oh, you think so? Yeah, it's going to be.
And we met him again at Vegas before they got married.
Yes, one time we met. We rendezvoused in Vegas, and we had a good time with them there. Lori passed out waiting in line for breakfast, and Vincey kind of saved her, but
you passed out in line?
No, Lori did. That's when we sort of laughed about them as a couple, because here Huey had passed out at our wedding twice, and we're standing in line for breakfast, and all of a sudden, whoop, down she goes, and I said, oh man, these two are made for each other.
Hold each other up.
I thought they were going to have little babies that run around fainting everywhere.
How did I save her?
Because she started swallowing her tongue, and you went you went right into mode. You went in and pulled her tongue out and everything, and then she was okay. And after she ate something, she was fine. But
seems like you two drank a lot there, and funny things happened too, didn't?
No.
Didn't you guys?
No,
do
Lori.
Something funny?
No, Lori. We weren't big drinkers then, or ever really. No, but we had a good time with them there, just a couple days. And then Huey was going to propose, and he told us, well, I'm going to propose. We're going over to a friend's house, and they have a spa, and we're going to get in the spa, and I'm going to propose. Well, he tried to do that, but I don't remember which one of them fell asleep. It was either Huey or her. So that didn't work out. So the next morning, they're having breakfast together, and Huey says, a toast. They were having champagne with their breakfast, but Huey always said a toast, because that was something we all sort of did. And so she didn't think anything of it, and he said a toast. And then he got down on one knee and proposed to her, and she was all excited and everything. And then that was in April of 1981, and it was, do they wait another year to get married, or they get married that summer? Because her brother David was going to be overseas. He was in the Navy, and he was going to be gone for a year. So if they didn't get married by August, they had to wait a whole nother year. Well, they didn't want to wait that long, so they had to plan a wedding between April and August, and they did. And they got married in August of 81. We drove over.
Because we were in the wedding, or I was.
We were both in the wedding.
Okay.
But you were best man. I was just one of the gals.
We had a nice bachelor party for Uncle Huey.
He didn't drink tequila again for at least 10 years.
Because he drank it that night. And
it wasn't the night before the wedding, it was a couple nights before the wedding. And he got very sick on tequila. I mean, the guys kept, I was the only female there because I was staying with them and it was at Huey's house. He just had all his frat brothers come over and they kept telling him to, you know, take another shot, take another shot. And I remember saying to him, they're not going to quit until you get sick. So about 30 seconds after that, he got sick and they left him alone and put him to bed. But after that, he couldn't stomach tequila again for at least 10 years. So anyway, they had a beautiful wedding and the reception, her family church, and the reception was up at top of some hill.
And we had a theme song come out of that wedding because driving from the wedding to the reception, they played a song that was very popular then, and we decided that was our little four of us theme song that was...
I didn't ride with you guys.
Well, you were riding with us because it was
no,
4 of us.
I was in the car with David because it was it was...
It was a time when the 4 of us were together.
That wasn't the time, though. What I'm telling you is when we went to the reception, it was the maid of honor and the best man with the bride and groom.
Could it have been after the reception then? It was during that time that with 4 of us were in the car. And you remember
that was at Bass Lake.
Do you remember the name of the song? Celebration.
Celebration. But let me tell you, when we went from the wedding, which was a little bit of a drive, it was 45 minutes from the church to the reception, you and Cindy, being the maid of honor and the best man, maid of honor and the maid of honor and the maid of honor and the best man, drove Huey and Lori, who were in the back seat, and I followed with
this is one of those
Verklump. I know it doesn't really matter, but I had to say it.
That's fine.
Lori's brother David, I rode with him there because it was Cindy's husband. So,
in any case, it was during this time period, not at Bass Lake, that, and you can look it up, Google it if you want, that song Celebration was so popular, and I have this memory of the 4 of us driving in a car around. It could have been before the wedding or after, whatever, but we had decided that that was our little theme song for the 4 of us.
Right.
Because the words were so apropos.
You know that song?
Yes, yes.
Celebrate. So anyway,
you're not the 3 Dog Night. Celebrate the... There's a party going on around here.
Yes, because we would party together, the 4 of us, and we had such a good time together.
I believe it was a little bit later that year we all met again up at Bass Lake. It was September. They always like to go up in September, and they got married in August, and so they'd been on their honeymoon to Hawaii, and then they went to Bass Lake, and we met him at Bass Lake.
And I think the song you're thinking of was the Michael Jackson Vegetable.
I'm
a vegetable.
Yeah.
But that was the next year. Okay. That was the next year.
Because Huey knew the lyrics, and you guys couldn't believe them.
During this time we were living with Huey in L.A. up to the time that he got married, and before their kids happened, we would often rendezvous at Bass Lake. And sometimes with his frat brothers, and once with Jimmy Oliver and his wife, but and sometimes just the 4 of us. But we had a lot of fun times during that time at Bass Lake.
Yeah.
Any other interesting stories from Bass Lake from any of those times?
Well, we went up with you too.
No,
you were a baby,
pre
you. We went up about every year in September because he would just sort of say, we're going to be up here for 2 weeks, you come whenever you can, and maybe we come up for a long weekend, or because one time we flew up there, but I think that was before we were married. And but usually we drive up there. We drive up and stay with him for a week or so.
There wasn't one particular moment I remember. It was just the usual routine, which would be skiing in the morning early and a couple times during the day, and ending the day with a barbecue out in Huey's front yard.
Sometimes it was barbecue, hike up the falls, then come back and barbecue, and then sometimes even go out in the lake at night. That was kind of stuck. Give me the Willy Jillies. Willy
Jillies.
Go out in the lake at night
because you turn all the lights off
and you
see
the Milky Way. And
so many stars, and it makes you realize. It would kind of give me the creeps because it would what's the term I'm looking for? The willies.
Heebie-jeebies?
The heebie-jeebies. So give me the heebie-jeebies or the willies, so to speak, because you'd look up and there was so many that you could hardly see the sky. And you'd realize how much there is out there and how insignificant.
A still more glorious dawn awaits, not a sunrise, but a galaxy rise. A morning filled with 400 billion suns. The rising of the Milky Way.
Billions and billions.
Really,
words of Carl Sagan.
we're just not, even our solar system's nothing, and then you talk about the planet within that, and then a little thing on the planet that you can't even see. We're just like...
Yeah. You could really see our galaxy, the Milky Way, well out there.
And believe it or not, audience, though we are in Colorado as we're filming this, my mom is not on marijuana right now while she's talking about this.
She's naturally high.
Naturally this way.
I'm a happy
always been
person.
that way.
I'm a happy person. I like all people. Most of the time. Most of the time.
And when she isn't happy,
you know it.
It's only temporary. Everybody knows it, but she gets past it and
so
happy again quickly.
So they don't care because they know I won't stay that way.
But anyway, that takes us through Huey's wedding and into 81. Anything else you remember about 81?
Jobs you were working?
I was still with Bob Clear, like Mama said, up to about before James was born, right before, right after.
You were with Bob after James was born because I used to take him to the office there at Peoria. Okay. In fact, they did a bet. Only people that knew us would bet on that. There was a chart and people were betting on what date James would come. We didn't know it was James. We didn't know what we were having and how much he would weigh.
And what sex.
Jumping way ahead right now.
Right.
So
our activities during that time were, like Mom said, dinks, and when we weren't working and developing my practice, we were enjoying life, partying. During that time, I had one interesting case. I had a lot of interesting cases. It seems like I was interviewed by a TV crew, a national TV crew, on one of my cases.
Debbie Milkey.
Was that the Debbie Milkey case?
Who just now got out of prison after 30 years.
But in any case, I had a juvenile case, and I got into juvenile, one, because I enjoyed representing children, and two, because they were looking for attorneys to represent children and parents, and they didn't pay as much as the going rate. So if you were willing to sacrifice the money, you could get your foot in the door and learn the practice, which I did. And I was assigned at one time to represent a woman maybe in her 30s who had been in prison for a year, maybe less, because she had been used by her boyfriend at the time as a mule to carry illegal drugs, and she got in trouble and the boyfriend disappeared. But she had had two children, probably age 3, maybe, and 5, who were taken away from her at the time. And after she got out of prison, well, actually jumping backwards, while she was in prison, she met a woman who she fell in love with, and the dynamics of the case were that she had also been a prostitute at times. Her boyfriend must have been a pimp using her for that purpose. She had been involved in drugs, went to prison for that, and she had turned lesbian in prison with this woman who was black, and the woman I represented was white. So we had a lot of dynamics going against us at the time. And I remember the case so much because I had researched and resourced psychologists who testified, or evidence I presented, to show that lesbian couples were just as effective, if not more so, as parents. And
but you have to add that they had cleaned their life up.
And they had cleaned their life up, and she, the black woman, was the butch and was a truck driver and heavy equipment operator. And the thing that won the case for me was the fact that we had a judge named Kimball Rose, who became famous years later as being the Supreme Court judge, and the one who oversaw the Evan Meacham and prosecuted our governor. Evan Meacham got him impeached. But I remember the turning point afterwards, because the Judge Rose told us afterwards why he decided to return the children to my client. And I was fighting not only the county attorney, but also the attorney for the children. And it was sort of an upset victory. But I called my client, decided to let her testify. And it was a tough call to have her testify because I wasn't sure how she'd come across and all the history that they'd bring out against her. But while she was there, I asked her the question why, one of the last questions, why she wanted her children back. And it was her answer, breaking down, crying, saying how much she loved her children, that apparently reached Judge Rose. That's thunder, if you're picking that up. And he told us afterwards that was really the deciding factor why he decided to give the kids back. And she got the kids back and promptly moved to San Francisco with her lover after the court case. And the next day, when the verdict reached the papers, which it was big news in conservative Arizona, a lesbian ex-felon given children back by this Judge Rose, I had a rock thrown through my window at my law office. That's what I remember about that case.
Suspect by some Arizona rednecker?
Exactly. And of course the newspaper articles, the editorial and all the letters to the editors were vicious. I remember that. And we cut out a lot of that stuff, and it's in our law scrapbook material that eventually we'll get to and complete, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So after Huey's wedding, so he got married in 81, and I continued working for the school, and so I'd be off in the summer, which was nice, and you were building your law practice, and you were still practicing on Peoria with Bob Catilla.
Bob Clear
and Nick Catilla across the hall, Bruce Alper down the corridor, and Joe Causey with you in the same law field.
And at some time, excuse me, honey,
mm-hmm.
I want to tell the story about Niall Smith, or Mom probably will tell it better than I do. The attorney that I started out with, Niall, was from Indiana, and he was a very nice guy. He had some quirks though, but it's jumping perhaps a little ahead, but just remind me to tell you about Niall Smith in more detail.
What happened later on?
Is it temporally important? Or, I mean, like, does it matter when you tell it?
No.
Go ahead and tell it now while you're thinking about it.
Well, some of the quirks about Niall, he was a short, overweight guy, but a very sharp attorney, and he really knew his criminal law. But one of the quirks was that he loved playing war games. And he actually had a whole room at his house. He had 2 children and a very nice wife, Kathy, who was the secretary. And he'd set up the whole extra bedroom with his war game, which would be spread over a table 3 times the size of this. And it was a type of war game that you actually played with dice, but you would determine like it was the South Pacific War or the World War II in the Europe invasion, or it was large epic ones, or even Napoleon's Waterloo battle. And he loved it because you could represent one side or the other and change the war if you wanted to, and he was really into it. He tried to get me into it, and I thought, man, this is too detailed, too much time and into it, but he just loved it.
So basically,
so it's even more than like Risk or Axis and Allies.
But you have to understand too, this was a Indiana, Midwestern, straight arrow, nerd, really. Smart nerd, but a nerd. I mean, and his wife was Midwestern too, and salt of the earth people, and go ahead.
Later on in life, you tell the story, remember better.
All right. Well, of course, Papa wasn't practicing with him anymore at this time, but he was doing, like you said, criminal law, and that's practically all he did. And
actually the tie-in I was involved in because he had wanted me to go in with him
this
on
is what I was going to tell.
Personal injury case.
This is what I was going to tell. There was a personal injury case of a stripper, and so
she was injured while she was working.
So they were going to go down, and he wanted Papa to go with him down to this strip place because
Strictly for business reasons.
right, because
Well, he was
he
sort of
really wanted
apprehensive.
well, that's what I was going to say.
I'm sorry.
You want me to tell, and then you're interrupting. So he
This is
wanted,
how they always are. Don't worry.
so he wanted Papa to go down
Long and happy marriage with this.
to basically because he was this nerdy guy and he was uncomfortable going down to a strip place by himself. So he wanted Vince not only to Papa to go down with him, but to sort of be the macho guy with him, but
And to help him.
and to help him and to give him his opinions and whatnot.
Which I declined. He wanted me to go in with the personal injury claim. I said, no thanks, I'm not
Right.
interested.
So he did go down, and I was giving him a hard time and teasing him. Oh yeah, you guys have to go to a strip place. Oh, have fun and everything. So you went down with him and you assessed the situation, and that was really the end of your part of it. But then, you know, life went on and things happened, and all of a sudden we heard that Niall Smith was practically murdered by some
Boyfriend.
pimp, that they slit his throat and left him for dead, but he survived.
And that same stripper was in the room at the time.
And so we found out the whole story later, after the fact, that he got involved with this case and got with the wrong people and started doing cocaine. And he started screwing this stripper prostitute, you know, and doing cocaine, and just the opposite of you would ever dream someone like he would do. And because of that, he got some of the wrong people mad. I think he owed him money, and they came in with the intention of killing him. And they slit his throat and left him, but he survived, and of course he was disbarred.
Well, not only that, but he hid.
Yeah.
He literally moved back to Indiana unbeknownst to everybody and quit his practice. And
Well, he
his
was
dad
disbarred.
ran a bank back there. He worked sort of undercover for his dad, but the authorities were looking for him, and the state bar was looking for him because all these clients were complaining.
That's how we first heard about it. They contacted you and said,
Bob Clear and I, because we were Niall's closest friends, and they asked us what was going on and whether we had any information. I remember having to go meet with the head judge, wanting to know what information I had on Niall, and we were asked to cover cases for him. I must have covered a half a dozen cases where I appeared for
yeah,
him.
because he just didn't show up in court, and they didn't know, his clients didn't know where he was, and yeah, that was kind of
And then
was
jumping
unbelievable.
Farther forward, he ends up returning to Arizona after things quieted down, and
He and his wife divorced, of course.
and he ends up driving a taxi cab. That's how the last contact I had with him was when he called me and we talked. I think we went out to lunch, and he was telling me he was now driving a taxi, enjoyed it, and still seeing his kids. He was very
That's
much
why he
into his
came
kids.
back.
Yeah, that's the Niall Smith story.
Yeah, so that was like, we just couldn't
Wow.
believe it. It was just the last person you would ever believe that would happen to. So, anyway.
And that's that.
So before we go on, let's talk a few topics about the 70s we haven't talked about, pop culture and whatnot wise. You said the Iranian hostage crisis wasn't really that big of a deal to you guys.
No, it was a very big thing going on in the country then, but Pop and I weren't really into politics too much then, or you know.
We knew what it was and the significance of it, but I can't tell you other than that the Iranians held 100 and some of our people for over 400 days before they were finally released.
Anything else about it? The handling of it?
Well, those negotiations the whole time. I can't remember the details.
What year was that?
79, I think.
Was it Reagan's?
No,
era?
Jimmy Carter's.
Jimmy Carter.
It was Jimmy Carter. Yeah.
Were you guys like into disco at all?
No.
No.
Well, in the sense we loved the music.
We loved the music, but we didn't go to
Did you
disco
really?
clubs.
Aside from
Well,
the Bee Gees, did you listen to any other disco bands?
Not really.
Okay. Were you really into the music?
Yeah, Saturday Night Fever. We love the Bee Gees.
I know, but aside from the Bee Gees.
The Bee Gees.
Oh, there was
yeah.
Roman Holiday?
No, with the fabulous voice. She's still cutting music today. They had the big hit and the big voice.
You talking about Carole King? No, because that was early 70s and she's
woman.
not disco. Oh, Donna Summers.
Donna Summers.
She just passed away. She's not still cutting music.
She's cutting music someplace else.
In heaven.
But yeah, we were affected by it in the sense that I even had a disco clothes.
Well,
you had disco
you
clothes?
had a couple outfits that your ex-girlfriend bought for you that you wore reluctantly when you wanted to dress up. He did have one pair of platform shoes. In fact, that purple sweater that you wear, James, is it from the disco era? That tight-fitting sweater was big. Then that came from there.
Polyester
Didn't you probably still don't have it, but you had for a while like an off-white one that had a zipper that was zipped up halfway and had a ring on it, and I think it tore and you probably got rid of it. That was you wore that for a while, and that was from the same. We held on to those clothes because they were, era clothes, and they sort of come back into style. The tight clothes, because guys like to show off their, if they've been working out. No, because it's up here.
We enjoyed watching them dance, but we weren't.
What I said, we weren't involved is the late 70s was big on going to clubs, disco clubs. But we were already married by then and living here. And in Phoenix, they didn't know what disco was.
Right. Was it really big in California?
It was big in California, and I'll tell you a little side story. When Pop and I were out here and he was studying for the bar, our friend Carol, what was his name? Carol, remember their last name was Van Name? He went to law school with you. She was a bigwig in computers. She was at the starting end. She had her degree. Rick and Carol Van Name. And we were living down in Tempe then, and she called me and said, I'm going to be in Tucson on business. She had a great job. She was like the computer programmer when computers were just getting started, so she was in high demand. And she says, I'm going to be down there. Can you come down to Tucson and we can hang out? And I said, sure. So I wasn't doing anything anyway. He was studying all the time. I was sort of bored. So I took our little VW van and I drove down to Tucson. And she had a hotel room already, and we went out that night, and she was looking, being from Southern California, she was looking for a disco place, because she said, we can go to disco place, people leave you alone if you want, we can talk and blah blah, listen to good music and blah blah blah. So we started hitting the places in Tucson, and they were all just honky-tonk places, and swing dancing. It's probably still that way today. And so she was like,
what kind of dancing?
Swing dancing.
In square?
No, swing dancing. A lot of swing. Swinging, holding hands and doing the arm over and that type of thing. Salsa dancing, if you will. And so we kept going to all these little night spots. We kept asking, and finally she asked some waitress or something. She says, isn't there any disco places in this town? And this gal said, oh, no, honey, we don't have any disco. It's all country here. We just, country music, country bars. So we just decided to just stay in one of them and just talk. And, we got hit on a couple times, but we were both married, so. What,
did you really, find disco music, aside from the Bee Gees, enjoyable?
Well, I don't know. She wanted to go to disco, and I was sort of out of all that, so I was like,
you were out of it?
Yeah, I was like, disco, I didn't care where we went. She was the one who was hepped on going to a disco place. But I remember the lead singer of the oldest Bee Gees, the only one who's still alive, Barry. He did an album with Barbra Streisand in the late 70s. I have the CD called Guilty. I love that album. So I guess you could call that disco too, but it's connected to the Bee Gees again. I don't think Donna Summers though is disco, but I guess she started that way, huh? Yeah.
The disco was on a lot of music. It was sort of like techno music. not a lot of different songs, but just a different kind of beat.
Mm. It was just different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it was good to dance to.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. And that's why it became popular in bars and stuff, because it was fun to dance to.
Gotcha.
But the clothes were outrageous. I mean, Austin, Austin Power and that type of thing is sort of, even though that's the 60s, it's still the platform shoes and the tight tops on men and the bell bottoms and the hip hugger pants. Everybody, but those styles come and go too. I mean, hip huggers were just real popular here, and they're sort of going out again.
So, okay, moving on. I didn't expect to have such a huge topic in disco.
We're trying to cooperate here.
Thank you. I think Saturday Night Live.
Are you going to edit those out of the tape?
Started in the 70s, right?
Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was disco music.
Okay.
Uh huh. No.
The hour and a half show.
Saturday Night Live.
I thought you said Fever. Saturday Night Live started in the early mid 70s, because we were still in California when it started, and I really probably got into that more after we moved here, don't you think? No, because we watched it in California because we were with Huey, unless it was when he moved here. Because remember Cheeseburger Pepsi with John Belushi? Oh, we'd laugh our heads off at that.
They had a great initial
You want to tell
set
us,
of comedians.
describe the skit?
Well, it's not really, if you tell somebody, it's not that funny. You have to see it and just...
Okay, what was funny about it then?
Just John Belushi.
Oh, okay.
But it was... That original cast was so awesome. John Belushi, Chevy Chase, Bill Murray. Of course, he came in a little bit later, Bill Murray, I think. And...
Dan Aykroyd.
Dan Aykroyd and Lorraine Newman and... What's the blonde?
Gilda Radner.
Yeah, Gilda Radner, but what was the blonde chick's? Jane Curtin. I mean, they all became stars in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even the black guy.
And it was live. That was what made it so...
I don't remember his name.
Special, because all of TV was taped at the time for sporting events. And this was live comedy.
It wasn't live on the West Coast, though, just the East Coast.
I mean, when they filmed it, you either knocked it over the fence with a home run skit, or you really bombed. So
they had some reoccurring things, and they still do now, that are funnier the more you see them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was one of their fortes. You remember when Jaws became, everyone read Jaws and they made the Jaws movie. Of course, Saturday Night Live made fun of that. Remember? Candy Graham. The big, open the door, big shark would come. I mean, it was silly humor, but when you saw it over and over again, it just got funnier.
And Eddie Murphy, of course, got his start there too.
Yeah.
He was doing Alfalfa.
I mean, look at all the people who came out of Saturday Night Live that, became household names.
Yeah, they had
that
great stars that came afterwards, but nothing like that first group with so
Right.
many at one time.
I agree.
So it made it special in the 70s.
Mm-hmm. But they sort of went through not a dry spell, but a spell where only a few really made it past that in a big way. But then they sort of had a resurgent here the last few years, because with Jason's... I can't think of it. I can never say his last name. Jason
Siegel?
No,
Sedette?
the one who's married to Olivia
Newton-John.
Olivia Wilde. He's married to Olivia Wilde, and he was in that movie.
Just the fact that we could recall all those earlier stars.
Bill Hader.
Well, what about the...
Now we can't even barely tell you the latest ones.
Well, what about the group with Christopher Walken and Will Ferrell and Chris Farley and Adam Sandler?
Yeah, that was an awesome
generation.
group too. That was an awesome group too. There were some awesome groups. I mean, it's been on how many years now? 40 years? And there's been dry spells and then spells. Even in what's his face, the guy who got injured and almost killed in that car accident, Tracy Morgan.
Mm-hmm.
He came from Saturday Night Live. I mean, there's just been Tina Fey. My favorite. No, I can't think of her name. The blonde, Tina Fey's friend. Amy Poehler. She's my very favorite ever female comedian. My favorite ever. I just think she is hilarious. She was on a talk show recently, and the person said, "Oh, I hear you and Tina aren't going to do the Golden Globes anymore." She says, "Nope, we want a drink."
You know, you brought up Jaws. That's a subject we didn't really touch upon. You were, no, you'd moved from California at that time. No,
it's surprised how old that was. It's on the timeline.
When I read it, I was in college, so it was the early 70s.
Yeah. And living in California.
One of the few books my mother actually read. Really.
That's important. She better play that one again, too.
She read Jaws, and I think she might have read Godfather. I'm not sure.
Can we get a repeat on that, Jimmy?
And, but it was, everybody read that book.
And it was such a great movie that it even...
And they did
won over the next
job.
Generation, and the generation after that, and your generation.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you didn't want to go in the ocean after seeing that movie.
How about after reading the book? Were you okay going?
No. No, I think the book is more
scary.
I mean, they did a great. One reason why that movie was so great was the music.
Won an Academy Award.
Yes, that haunting music. When you heard that music, you knew the shark was. But in the book, there's other ways of doing that. But I think that was brilliant how they did that in the movie.
I can remember an episode regarding Jaws. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the four of us, Huey and me and you and my dad, went to see it in Century City, and it was so scary to my dad that he wanted to leave, and he and I went out and watched another movie, the Truman monologue.
He didn't go out. He didn't want to see Jaws.
He didn't want to see it to begin with.
Yeah. You guys went to see the Truman, the one-act Truman. That's right, I forgot about that. And Huey and I saw Jaws.
And then afterwards, we went to the Playboy Club there in Century City.
That's right. That was that same night. We have a picture over by the bar of all of us at the Playboy
Wow,
Club.
Did we get off topic?
Yeah.
Jaws.
Mm-hmm.
Just remember
Well,
that.
it was a big social phenomenon. What word am I trying to say?
Even more so than
Phenomena.
Exorcist, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Exorcist had that kind of an impact at that level, similar to Star Wars when that came out.
I was just about to get to that.
That looks like a witch's hat. That looks like a witch's hat.
Okay, settle down. I was just about to get to that. The movie that changed filmmaking for many years afterwards, Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
Which was later be named A New Hope.
Okay, I can tell you about that.
Oh.
I hadn't heard. I wasn't into movies too much then or something. I think because I was so busy going to school, driving back and forth from Disneyland, coming to your place. And my whole life was centered around driving. And we both had the day off, and you said to me, I heard about this movie. Huey told me about this movie, and all the engineers at Rockwell are talking about it because it's the most realistic outer space movie that's ever been made. That's all I knew about it. And he says, we got to go see it. So we went during the day to Grauman's Chinese in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And that was in the days when there weren't a mob of tourists down there every hour of the day.
People.
And we went to the matinee, and it was like nothing you'd ever seen before. Especially that opening scene with that surround sound, and that ship looked like it was just coming right over your head because the sound did. It was just, from that moment on, you were just like, and it was unbelievable. We went home, we had to tell Huey about Huey hadn't seen it yet, and he was so jealous. I think we went to see it with him again, didn't we?
We went to see it again.
We saw it many times. It was pretty awesome back in its day. And of course, That was where I saw my Harrison Ford for the first time.
Didn't you see him in American Graffiti? Or did you not see it in theater?
He was such a small role in that I didn't really pay attention.
But yeah, a major film that changed decades of films of antiheroes and
Special
dark
effects.
lines that revolutionized special effect engineering in movies and sound.
And I have to tell you, what you just touched on there, that was a big deal because that Halloween Darth Vader costume was the biggest costume with all the others combined. And parents were a little concerned that their kids were identifying with the bad guy. Because that hadn't happened. It was always Superman or Spider-Man, or it was always the hero of the movie. And this time the kids were drawn to the bad guy, and it bothered a lot of parents. I remember we didn't have kids, or we weren't even thinking of kids then. So.
And it was important to note that the creator and the genius behind the whole thing was a Trojan.
It was a condom.
We got off the topic. What kind of car did you do all that driving around in? Do you remember?
B210 Datsun.
Well, you sure
A
that
little,
it was? You
a
drive
little Ford.
Apollo too.
I had a. When you and I were very first together, I had a Malibu. I had a Chevy Malibu,
Yeah.
but I wasn't driving that much then.
I thought you were going from Cal Lutheran to Disneyland, to Orange County, back
Go
up
pull
to
the
our
tape.
apartments.
Getting off topic.
Yeah.
I thought a little nostalgia named the car.
Yeah, but the B210 was towards the end. That was after that's when we took our honeymoon in. But
Right.
yeah, you're right. Well, I had the Chevy Malibu, the first part. Used to call it the boat. And then that bit the dust, and I bought the B210 was the first car I bought myself. So I think that's why I have more fond memories of that.
Okay.
The Malibu was a car my parents bought for me to go back and forth to Thousand Oaks when I was in college.
All right. Last subject, revolutionary person in broadcasting, TV broadcasting around that time, Johnny Carson.
What?
Yes, what do we remember about Johnny Carson?
Johnny Carson show, The Tonight Show. Johnny Carson was The Tonight Show for years and years and years.
Actually, the first Tonight Show was Jack Parr.
Yeah, I know. But
Wasn't it Steve Allen?
Jack Parr, then
Jack
Steve
Parr.
Allen.
I thought Johnny replaced Jack Parr.
I don't think Steve Allen was the
Oh, yeah.
He had his own show in the evening.
Oh, before was
Look
the
it
Tonight
up.
Show. Okay. I'll look it up. But anyway, continue on about Johnny Carson.
So.
Oh, he's from Nebraska, and he had a very sharp, dry wit about him, and his forte was interviewing and making other people interesting, which was perfect for the type of show he did, which was hosting a late night show where people would watch in bed before they fell asleep, and his guests were always interesting, and he always brought on young comedians like Joan Rivers got her start there.
A lot of babies were conceived during the Johnny Carson show. That's what they used to say.
He could even make skits with animals funny.
Well, and he always did skits too. He didn't just interview. He had a lot of reoccurring skits.
Yeah. Like where he was able to
read the mind. Karnak, the something or other. And he'd hold up a card, and he'd read the question, and the answer was in the envelope.
His sidekick would always be
Ed
the
McMahon.
front guy.
Ed McMahon.
Karnak! The magnificent Karnak.
Simsalabim.
Welcome once again. We have a special NBC family in our audience tonight, anxious to see and hear your great wisdom. I have the envelopes here. They've been hermetically sealed, kept in a mayonnaise jar on Bob Howard's porch since noon today. No one knows the contents of these envelopes, but your incredibly divine way will ascertain the answers without ever before seeing the question. Isn't that right, sir?
That's impossible. Oh, yes.
You'll do it.
Of course, that's what I'll do.
The first envelope.
May I have absolute silence, please, as I divine the...
Yes, hermetically sealed.
Yes, I understand that. I will divine the answer, even though the question has been sealed in
That
here.
means that no one could even open it up if they wanted to except you.
That's true. 1,000 clowns.
1,000 clowns.
That's what I said. Who put together the NBC fall schedule?
We're right for the beat.
The one I remember the most that he held up, he says, "What happens when the smog lifts in Southern California?" And the answer was UCLA.
No. You go. He would foresee the answer. UCLA.
That's right. The other way around.
And then the question is,
what happens?
Hermetically sealed.
What happens when the smog lifts in Southern California?
UCLA.
UCLA.
What happens when there isn't any smog?
Yeah, Steve Allen was the first host, 1954 to 1957, followed by Jack Parr, 1957 to 1962.
Made the sewers of Anchapur back into your 6 o'clock news.
And Johnny Carson for 30 years.
Steve Allen hosted with his wife, I believe, Jane Meadows.
I don't think they co-hosted, honey.
I don't think she was on.
No, he might have had her on as a guest, but she didn't co-host.
And anything else about Johnny Carson or anything like that?
Well,
he had a lot of girlfriends, a lot of wives. Lived in Malibu.
He had 4 wives, and the first 3 all had Joe. It was Joan, Joanne, Joanna. And then I think his last wife's name was Erica or something like that. So
I used to joke about his divorces.
And alimony. He used to joke a lot about alimony. And Ed McMahon was married a couple times as well, so the two of them would joke about it. But he had a lot of connections to Hollywood. And of course, if you were a newcomer and you got on his show, that's what happened with Joan Rivers, is you became a star overnight. You were a household name the next day. And even Barbra Streisand. And I can tell you a little story here. Barbra Streisand was on the show, and he's, introduced her. I heard this gal sing. She's the most phenomenal voice I've heard, blah, 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 like he did. And she came on and sang, and you know how Barbra Streisand sings beautifully, and she had this gorgeous voice. And my mother said, it's too bad. With that nose, she'll never make it in Hollywood.
He has some famous one-liners, one of which was one of his famous, which I don't remember the line, but maybe you remember if I tell you the skit, is where he had the singer Ed Ames on, who was doing an Indian movie at the time where he learned to throw a tomahawk.
A song.
No, it wasn't. It was a singer, Ed Ames, who was on promoting a film he was doing where he played an Indian.
Right.
And he threw hatchets.
I saw that live.
And he got Johnny Carson to stand up there against.
No, Johnny Carson didn't.
No,
but
no,
it was
no.
it was
underhanded? No.
Overhanded.
It's an overhand throw. The trick is to keep your arm extended, and that way you break the microphone. You keep your arm extended and put only one revolution on the once around on the way. But that's indefinite. All right. Right.
And then another great line was when he had Jack Nicklaus's wife on before a big golf tournament, one of the Masters, and he asked her,
is there any
innocent.
routines that's done the night before? And she says, well, I always cook him veal the night before, and I always kiss his balls. And of course, Johnny just had to look at the camera,
Yeah,
and
that look.
everybody just died laughing because, that was pretty risque for back then, so you couldn't say much, but just his look.
There was enough innuendo.
Yes, there was enough. Exactly.
And he'd bring on my favorite comedian, one of my favorite, Don Rickles, and he'd just sit back and let Rickles rant
Yeah.
and get on to everybody.
Yeah.
Johnny fell off the chair once. He was laughing so hard.
Johnny
Rickles
knew
was-
when to just let the person go. He didn't try to control things. He would just
Real
let him.
talent.
He knew how to. He really did, and he would just say stuff like that. What I said the other day, I did not know that. That was funny when someone was trying to really make a point that wasn't that interesting. I did not know that.
I did not know that.
But yeah, Joan Rivers always, even though they had the feud, she credited him all the time because he saw her and thought she was hilarious and had her on the show, and that was it. The next day she was a household name and it became a big star, so.
A lot of comedians got their break. Steve Martin got his break.
Yeah.
All right.
So he had a lot of power.
A lot of power.
He became one of the most powerful figures in Hollywood, in fact, commanding the highest salary, which I can't remember what it was, but it was astronomical in those days.
And the reason why, and later on in his career, he didn't work as much on the show. So there was a lot of guest hosts.
Yeah, he started a lot of people's careers.
Yeah, and that's how Joan Rivers, she came out. She was his most popular guest hostess.
Who else?
Well, the guy who replaced him.
Jay Leno.
Jay Leno.
With all scars. And
I don't remember back then.
who he wanted to take over the Tonight Show, who ended up getting his own show. Recently
David
retired.
Letterman.
Had one of the most popular TV shows in the 90s, this comedian did.
The 90s.
The show about nothing.
Seinfeld?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't realize that. He was a guest host?
Oh, no, he got his start on
He
it.
got his start on that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Gary Shandling.
Oh, yeah. Well, Gary Shandling had a talk show parody show. A fake talk show, remember? That was funny. We watched that. Okay.
All right.
What next?
So even up to me coming along, you guys took a lot of trips.
Yes.
Everywhere. You told me about a few of them, such as
About
your
every month we went somewhere.
trip to the Grand Canyon, and what else did you tell me about already?
Well, Papa hiked the Grand Canyon many more times. I hiked it once. Once was enough.
We took multi-trips to Disneyland.
Yes, that was, but we did that even before you were born, so.
We rendezvoused in Las Vegas with either Huey or Lori or my mom and dad many times.
Yeah, you have a funny story about you and your family in Las Vegas.
Yes, why don't you enlighten us on that?
Does she remember that story?
Oh, she'll never forget
Was that
it.
in Las Vegas or Tahoe?
I was in Las Vegas
Was
at
it the
downtown
convention
at
Frank
which hotel?
The Plaza.
Tell them why we got the comped.
Well, I'll tell you the whole story, but we were there. Your sister was there too, Rita Dell. It was Rita Dell and you and I and your parents, and it was around our anniversary. And
we liked to stay at the Union Plaza because my dad liked to go down and look at the trains coming in.
And in those days, we really liked gambling downtown more because it was all together. You could go from one casino to the other. The Strip at the time, the hotels were really far apart from each other. You almost had to take a cab from one to the other, or your car. So we, with your folks especially, and it was cheaper downtown. It was just nicer. It was more casual dress and the whole bit, more us. And so we were down there at the plaza, and his dad, Boompa, your Boompa.
Your great grandfather.
Yes. Your grandfather, and who's ever watching this, great grandfather, ran into his bookie, would you say, Vincent, from Santa Maria?
Someone who was affiliated with the family.
Yes. He was connected, let's put it that way. I can't remember his name.
Ed Cicerone?
No.
Where's that? Is that Tuna down?
Yeah, she's down.
Okay, enough with the dog.
Anyway, so he ran into him and he was like, oh, your whole family's here. Oh, you have to come have dinner on me. Come on, come have dinner on me. So we thought, well,
and he would get comped. It wasn't on him.
Right. He was a high roller, so everything was. But he did tip anyway, because I saw him hand the waitress a $20 bill, and back then that was like handing someone a $100 bill nowadays. So anyway, we got this nice table and everything was first class. We got the appetizers, and the drinks kept coming. First we had a before dinner drink, and then the wine started with the meal, and there was appetizers and meals, and I remember that was the first time we had Cherry's Jubilee, where they bring it to the table and it's all on fire and all that whole thing. And then we had after dinner drinks, so we were all sloshed, all of us. The first time I really saw your father, well, I saw him twice sloshed, then and at their 40th anniversary, but he was more subdued sloshed then. So anyway, so we're leaving the restaurant. We decided we need to go up to the room.
One of us wasn't sloshed.
Vincenzo was not sloshed.
Like you, I have a high tolerance apparently for it.
And so does your dad most of the time. And so we decided we need to go up to the room. And I don't remember what got us giggling. But we started giggling
in the
elevator, and I look over, and your mother started wetting her pants, and that made her laugh even more. And then when
everybody laugh.
And then when I looked at her, and I saw she was wetting her pants, I started laughing so hard I wet my pants.
I have this image of the girls getting into the elevator, and then little Scotty and my mom laughing her head off, and Louise, Mama, and Rita Dell getting so laughing their head off, and all of a sudden little Scotty didn't know what was going on, but he started laughing, and the whole people were staring, wondering what the heck was going on with these people in the elevator. So I jumped in and closed the door real quickly, and then
right, it was just us in the elevator. Like I said, she started wetting her pants, and when I saw her crotch getting wet, I started laughing harder, and I couldn't control it. I started wetting my pants, and I think Rita Dell wet her pants too. All three of us were wetting our pants.
Laughing loud.
I hadn't laughed so hard and so long. And then we get in the room and we think, okay, we're going to have to change our clothes and get all ready. And you laid down on the bed, and he laid down on the bed like this, and
face down.
And because I was drunk, I said, "Oh, baby!" And I went and jumped on top of him. And then your mom, because she was drunk, said, "Oh," and she went and jumped on top of me, on top of you, and then Rita Dell jumped on top of everybody, and then little Scotty, and this is why I knew he was crocked, is all of a sudden I look like this, and I see him running with those little legs, and boom, he threw himself on top of all of us, and we were just
then the bed broke.
No, it didn't. But we were just, it was just a crazy, funny
time.
Funny incident. But yeah, that was something I'll never forget. Couldn't believe it with my pants.
Now you listed down some places.
This is what our son's been playing with and distracting us the whole time we've been making this.
It's wax from covering cheese, and he's made it into a witch's hat. And what's this? A mushroom now.
Pretty good.
Obelisk.
Let me see. Our parents, your grandparents are very ADD. They're like, look at the whole time going, what is that he's making? Kind of reminds me of those cows you talked about in Iowa.
You should have seen the witch's hat.
Your fingers covering it.
You should have seen the witch's hat. It was pretty awesome. But anyway, that's what he's been doing. He's got to fumble, mess with something all the time. Pinewood. What's Pinewood?
Where Huey and the basic 6 went up to Pinewood area, and someone had a cabin there.
Barbara Darling, and we got to be friends, and she invited us over to their house, and her husband was Raymond, and they had these 2 friends.
And everybody loved Raymond.
No, everybody loved Barbara. Everyone put up with Raymond because of Barbara.
Weren't they a good 10 years older than us?
Raymond was 20 years older than me. She was. He might have been more than that.
But in any case.
But anyway, that's not important. Age never has been important with me with friends. But they had two friends that weren't a couple, that were both single people at the time. Virginia, who also worked at the bank. Virginia Schmidt was really my immediate boss. Barbara worked in loans, so she was like an equal. But
John
Virginia,
Snodgrass.
and then there was John Snodgrass, who at the time was only 19. So you had someone 19, and Raymond was like 60 at the time.
We all seemed to hit it off and enjoyed.
And you called
each other's
yourself
company,
the Sinister Six?
The Basic Six. We used to say the Basic Six, because if we had Super Bowl, it was the Basic Six. It was Barbara, Raymond, Papa and I, and John and Virginia.
We started having Super Bowl parties among a lot of other parties at their place as well as ours, and there was always the Basic Six getting together.
I think it was mostly here because.
Well, we went many times over to Raymond's
Yeah, but
place.
I don't think for Super Bowl.
Jacuzzi. No, not for Super Bowl.
No,
all the Super Bowl parties we had here, but I said we had many parties.
Yeah, we had parties at their place too. They had a hot tub. And of course, in the summer, it was always here because of the pool. We had barbecues. I remember one Super Bowl where they came over all day. They came in the morning, and I made my pepperoni and eggs. That's when we didn't have the bar there, and the table and chairs were in that area. And we had pepperoni and eggs that morning, and then we played croquet and stuff during the day, and then you barbecued, and then we watched the Super Bowl.
And because of our association with Barbara and Raymond, it's sort of jumping the gun, but in case we don't say it later, I got one of my most lucrative cases from them as a result of our relationship with them, representing a young man named Howard Forsher, who was Barbara's son. And he was
versus the state of Arizona.
He was injured in a kiln accident while a student at NAU and burned a large portion of his lung, and ended up winning that case and setting a record at that time, the largest amount of money ever won against the state of Arizona.
I must show you something right now. Come on. Now he's made a pretzel. And he wonders. That was important. And he wonders why we get distracted.
How about the San Diego trip with who is M and D and RD? Oh, that must be your parents in Rededale. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's a trip.
That was just one of many trips to San Diego.
And went to eat seafood and tour around.
Okay. And while we're talking about friends, I think around this time he's come up, but we must mention the vagabond known as Roberto.
Roberto. Well, Roberto, and that's not his real name, that's Papa's nickname for him, Roberto. His real name was Bob Sexton. And he was married to Belinda, and they had 2 kids. And
they got divorced.
Well,
and
how did you first get to be friendly with him? He was a client?
It was through his beginning of divorce proceedings.
He came in to see you about the divorce?
And he was able to work off his bill because he was an air conditioner repairman, a young kid actually. And he was a real nice young man and very knowledgeable with regard to air conditioning and that kind of stuff. And I don't know how exactly, I guess we sort of felt sorry for him because he had gotten kicked out of the house with Belinda, and we ended up allowing him to live with us.
He lived with us for 6 months, but that's not what happened first. First he was just first he worked off his bill by doing stuff. He put in insulation for us, and he put our vac cooler on our house, and he put those upducts in, which I always never liked, and we ended up taking out. Oh my goodness.
And then continuing on, he did he live with you?
He lived with us for about 6 months because yes, when he didn't get kicked out, but he had to get away from her, and because she didn't really want the divorce, I think at first, because she didn't want to lose the paycheck, I think, but because she clearly wasn't.
He would house sit when we went on our little trips. That's how trusted a friend he became, and he was very knowledgeable with cars and car repair as well.
So anyway, so we just had him live here till he found a place to live, and he ended up getting an apartment right over here. So he lived really close to us and stuff, and they divorced, and he tried a reconciliation. Remember, they got back together, and then of course it didn't work out because it was the same issues, and she had really fallen in love with one of his friends. It was so obvious, but you couldn't say that to Bob.
But Bob was like, Roberto was like a Huey.
It's like a Huey.
But not an educated Huey.
And an educated Huey.
He was very, very sweet, very nice guy, but very controlled by other people. And again, I think it was because we felt sorry for him and he didn't have any place, and we could tell he was a friend that could be trusted, and we enjoyed his time in our life. He ended up moving to California.
Well, he when he was living in the apartments over here, he met a gal named Kathy, who he ended up marrying, and they moved away. So.
And that was Roberto. He was around when you were born.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And there's many pictures of him holding me.
He babysat you one night, and we came home, and you were both sleeping on the floor in front of the TV. That's the kind of babysitter he was. He was like 2 or 3. You love that kind of babysitter. Didn't make you go to bed.
Yeah. Well, just went to bed on my own. And lastly, to precipitate the stereotype of Mama being the crazy cat lady, let's go over all the kitties.
At one time, we had a flock of them. A little flock.
A flock
Let's
of kitties.
see. There was, our very first one was the one that you and Huey found in L.A. called Toots.
Yeah.
And Toots moved, my mom took Toots when we went on our cross-country trip, and when we moved here, she sent Toots over with my brother Tom to us because we had a home now. And
TMI.
anyway, so she made the trip here, and she was here. So there was Toots.
Toots ended up being adopted by our across-the-street neighbors, the Baumans, who Mama went to their wedding in Colorado Springs. Well, we both went over there, but Mama was in the wedding. And Toots used to go across the street and stay with them because we had so many other cats, and she soon was spending more time with them, and they fell in love with her, so we allowed her to go to Colorado Springs when they moved.
They moved back to Colorado
Springs. We had
Springs.
Orty, named after Ordell, and we had Squinta Kunte, because she went around, she was a Siamese, or he was a Siamese, and his eyes were always squinty. And then we had Doobie.
That doesn't sound racist at all.
I know. But back then you could be politically incorrect. And
she always looked like she was squinting in the sun.
And we had Doobie, and we had...
How did Doobie get her name?
Because of Frank Sinatra.
Well, and plus she was No, and she was real tiny, so we said she was a little Doobie.
No, we used to sing the song, Doobie Doobie Doo, Doobie Doo Doo, Doobie Doobie Doo.
Yeah, but that's
Strangers in the
She
Night.
got the same name the way the Doobie Brothers got their name.
Okay.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
She got her name from Frank Sinatra.
But that's what we
did.
That was part of it.
That was part of that. In fact, her whole name was Dubla Babaluba, named after Huey as well.
Dubla Babaluba.
We had a thing back then that we'd named the animals, like Squinta wasn't Squinta, she was Squinta Kunte, and Dubla Babaluba, and Ordell was Orty. And who else did we have then? Sylvester.
Sylvester came along later.
Well, a little later, yeah.
We got Sylvester when James was 12.
Yeah.
And the other cats were here before James.
And actually, we had one bad cat that we ended up giving up on. One of the few
Kizzy.
pets that we ended up giving up. She was just a terror. Kizzy the killer.
A little boy took her. He wanted a Siamese, and he took her.
Thank
Remember?
goodness. We would have drowned
We
her
didn't
in the
really.
pool
We didn't go
otherwise.
get her. I took her because Annie Forschler, Howard's wife, the one we were just talking about, called me and said she had this cat, she couldn't keep it. She knew I had cats, and I brought her, but she didn't get along with any of the other cats, and she was mean. She was mean to people. But for some reason, she liked this little boy. And so the little boy took her, and that was the end of that. So, But then we had, oh, you forgot Muffin.
Oh, Muffin too, yeah.
How could you forget
And Muffin was the best cat ever. She, in fact, the way I got her was, I was outside and I saw this kitten playing in the yard across the street. That's when they had the lawn. And I said to Madeline, I said, is that your cat or her cat? And she said, no, I've seen this cat playing around, this kitten playing around. And I said something like, oh, hi, kitty, you're so cute, blah, blah, blah. And the kitty came running across the street. And I said, do you want to come in my house? And I opened my door and she came right in. And she went and fell asleep on the stairs. And you came home from work and you went up the stairs and you thought it was Doobie. And you said, hey, Doobie. And then you walked into our room and you said, hey, Doobie, wait. Then I just see you on the stairs. You go, Louise, there's a cat in our house that doesn't belong here. And I said, oh, yeah, I was going to tell you about that. That's our new cat. And you said, what? And I said, yep, it's our new cat. And she was the best cat. She was so affectionate and never caused any problems.
The image that sticks in my mind about Muffin occurred right there. We heard her squealing in the backyard, and you and I came into this room and looked right out that window there while Muffin was getting stuck by a male cat.
Don't say stuck. She was having intercourse. Because when we got her and I took her to the vet, he said that he couldn't fix her right away because she had mites in her ears and she was a little malnutrition and stuff. He wanted to get her healthier. And I remember I said to him, well, what if she goes into heat before, you know, you can do it? And he said, that's okay, we can still do the surgery even if she comes impregnated. So that's what happened. He says, we'll wait till she goes into heat and then we'll do it. So that's what happened. That's why she did. But I'd never had a cat that went into heat because I always got my cats fixed. And we were watching TV one night, remember, and she started going nuts, just nuts. And I said, what is wrong with this cat? She was like running all around and everything. And then, of course, when we let her out, and this black cat showed up and was like, okay. So I got her fixed shortly after that. But she was so affectionate and always wanted to sit on your lap, and she was a great cat. And she was an old cat when we got Sylvester. And I had to keep a squirt gun around because Sylvester would jump in on her and attack her. Remember that? And I'd have to squirt him with the squirt gun to get him off of her. She put up with a lot in her old age with that Sylvester. He was a terror. But he got it back eventually.
How did he get it back?
MC gave it to him.
That's, okay,
MC.
We'll get into that. Well, another topic, looking in the scrapbook here, one of the things you need to mention on the international scene was in 1983, the bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. Any comment on that? Anything big or just something that happened you had to write down?
Was it the embassy or was it the harbor where the Marines were killed?
U.S. Embassy in Beirut is what you wrote.
Yeah. See, this is how long these things, this is 2015 and this stuff is still going on. All these terrorist activities.
Terrorists.
The terrorists. So it was just one of many terrorist incidents that happened. Trying to attack America overseas. Go ahead.
I think of a significance now because of the Golden State Warriors winning the NBA title with their coach Steve Kerr, a U of A alumni, whose father was killed in that attack in Beirut. He was the ambassador
That's right.
at the time. He lost his dad while he was going to school.
Yeah.
Tell me what you know about Rasputin.
Oh, I know all about that because I read that Nicholas and Alexander book. Nicholas and Alexander he was the Tsar of Russia and she was his wife. And she was sort of a neurotic from reading the book. And she got involved with this Rasputin guy.
Why?
Because she was a neurotic and she wanted his... I can't remember. I read that book when I was in high school.
From what era was it?
Starts with a B, the Bo...
Well, what time frame?
Just give us years.
Oh, I don't know.
Erotic
He
woman?
influenced her.
What religion was he?
I don't know.
How did he influence her?
He like had a spell over her or something. No, he had some kind of power over her, and she started listening to everything he said, and she got her husband to listen too, and he led him down the wrong path. They were overthrown, and the whole family was
Why were they
killed.
overthrown?
They were overthrown by the people who were tired of their leadership, and by the citizens. And there's some word Bolshevik, and that started the Russian Revolution.
Who were the Bolsheviks?
The ones that were in power at the time. They were the elite, or the rich people.
And who were the other side?
The people who had nots. The
What
haves
were
and
they
the
called?
have-nots.
Proletarian, maybe?
I don't know. Was that what they were called? Because she was overly concerned with her weight, and she would weigh herself like 6-7 times a day. And so she was always not eating right and stuff. I think it affected her up here.
War of 1812. What year did it happen?
1812. Mighty Mississippi in the in 1814 we took a little trip down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico. How does it go with me?
Well, pretty close.
See?
14, we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. We took a little bacon and we took a little bean and we fought the bloody British in the Battle of New Orleans.
Well, that was between Mexico, wasn't it?
We fired our guns and the Mexicans kept a coming.
Like, okay, we already had our 13 colonies, and we were fighting over the center of America, the breadbasket, so to speak.
Who owned the breadbasket?
I know there was something like the Louisiana Purchase, right? Does that have to do with that? That's when we bought this whole middle part of our country with some beads. We paid for it with some beads.
Who did we buy it from?
The Indians.
Who bought it? Who was...
Jackson.
Jackson bought it?
Well, for the country.
It was when Jackson was a sitting president?
I don't know if he was a sitting president. I don't
But
think
he
so.
bought it?
He bought it. He didn't personally buy it. He bought it for the United States.
Oh, how did he have the authority to do that?
Congress, I guess. No. Uh-oh. Somebody's tooting.
Thanks.
Is that you?
Is that you?
Is that you?
Petunia.
The Louisiana Purchase was bought by Andrew Jackson even when he was not president.
I think it was just called the Louisiana Purchase, but it wasn't like really bought.
But, oh, okay.
Was it really bought?
I don't know, was it?
Yeah. I'd always been told that.
Well, maybe.
He could afford it. It only cost some beads.
I think we fought the British then, didn't we? And it seems like Mexico is involved somehow.
Those damn Mexicans are involved in everything.
You've been listening to Trump too much.
Did we buy it from the French?
Ooh, a light bulb.
Yeah, the French.
We had the authority of France at the time.
Oh boy, I don't know anything too much about French history, except let them eat cake.
Big historical military figure in France at that time.
Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
Do the names Lewis and Clark mean anything to you?
Yeah, they were explorers.
Where did they explore?
That area.
What were they trying to do?
Explore.
General Lafayette.
Sounds like a French person. They cut off her head. No, they guillotine.
How do you pronounce that word again?
Guillotine? Guillotine. Oh, guillotine, that's right.
What is the Holy Roman Empire?
Holy? I've heard of the Roman Empire, but not the Holy Roly. Holy Roly? Holy Roly Empire? I don't have a clue. The religious part of it? Catholic? They were in Rome after all.
Where was it?
I told you, vast over a lot of Europe.
You get mixed up with the Roman Empire.
Oh, it's two separate things? Something with the Pope?
What about Joan of Arc?
She was a warrior.
She was a warrior from where? Arc?
I want to say France, but...
She was fighting for what in France?
She was very religious. Oh, is that the Holy Roman?
No.
Oh, okay. I think she was fighting against the Christians. She was a
Christians?
pagan, wasn't she? I'm guessing.
In what conflict?
The Crusades? Could I have some help here?
Ask her about John Adams.
He was our first vice president, and our second president, and he was one of the designers of our
Framers.
of our Constitution of this here United States.
Where was he from?
England. No, he wasn't from England.
You just watched that whole series, babes.
He wasn't French. I thought he was from England. He was a farmer, really. He didn't really want to get involved in politics, but he got sucked in.
What political party did he represent?
And back then there were the Whip and something else. Federalists. No, I think he believed in strong central. He and Jefferson, even though they were good friends, sort of have different views on that, I remember. But I can't remember which one had which view.
So tell us about Martin Luther.
Martin Luther was a Catholic priest.
Where was he a Catholic priest?
In Germany. Was troubled by the Catholic Church at the time because it had become corrupt. They were taking money to forgive sins, and he knew it wasn't following biblical teachings. And not only that, but they were discouraging people from reading the Bible because they said only a priest could really interpret the Word of God. So the people weren't reading the Bible and understanding its meaning, and the church was becoming more and more corrupt. And so he broke away from the Catholic Church, but not with the intention of starting a new religion. In fact, he said, don't call yourself Lutherans. And of course, they didn't listen to him. And that's how Protestant churches started. And I know he posted something up, they call it Reformation Day in the Lutheran Church. He wanted to reform the Catholic Church. He didn't want to necessarily break away, but that's not what happened. And there's the Lutherans and the Methodists and the Presbyterians, and there's even fractures in the Lutheran Church itself, so.
All because of Martin Luther.
That's correct.
How about Henry VIII?
I'm Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am. I got married to the girl next door. She's been married 7 times before, but was it Henry? Wouldn't have a Willie or a Sam. No, Sam. I'm a wraith old man. I'm Henry. Henry VIII, I am.
What's
the Monkees. Really? I thought it was the Monkees. What did it start with?
Yeah.
Harry and the Hendersons.
Herman and the Hermits.
Herman and the Hermits. I always get those two groups mixed up. Dawn and I used to always sing that song on the rockets in Disneyland. I don't know why, but we did. So anyway, Henry VIII was, of course, the King of England. Don't tell me years because I don't know dates.
Before or after Elizabeth?
I would say before. After. Before? After? Like, what's his name? The comedian?
Eddie Izzard.
Eddie Izzard. You knew exactly who I was talking about.
Yes, but he's dead now.
Where is he?
Anyway.
And he wanted a male heir. And he kept marrying women who only gave him girls. And he beheaded all of them. But he divorced them. He beheaded some and divorced some. And because of that, he was Catholic, so he wasn't supposed to divorce, so he just said, screw the Catholic Church, and he started his own religion, which still is the religion in England today.
What's it called?
Church of... Oh, it was on the tip of my tongue when I was saying it. And then I can't remember now. Church of England. Didn't have to tell me. I said it before he told me. The Pope criticized him and the whole bit.
They didn't want to criticize him. He did what to him? What's that big long fancy?
Excommunicated him from the church. And he married Anne Boleyn. Boleyn, was that her name? She also didn't give him a son, so he had her head cut off.
Can you tell me anything about Tokugawa Ieyasu?
Excuse me? Sounds Japanese. I guess he had something to do with World War II. Was he the leader during the World War II of Japan, or was he a general? Was he the commander of the fleet that bombed Pearl Harbor? Yes,
so is the only thing Japan ever done is bomb Pearl Harbor?
No.
That was a biggie, though.
That was a biggie, though.
You knew it was Japanese.
Oh, with a name like that.
How about the Queen of Sheba? What do you know about the Queen of Sheba? I
had a cat named the Queen of Sheba once. I don't know. Yeah, that's always used with, oh, she thinks she's the Queen of Sheba, like she should be waited on.
What Israeli king was she associated with?
Israeli king? It's not a nickname for Cleopatra, is it? Cleopatra was Egyptian.
Associated with the Romans, Mark Antony.
Right.
Julius Caesar. The one she rumored to have had an affair with was the son of David. Who was the son of David?
Oh wow, we're talking way back then.
Way back.
Oh, she was the Queen of Sheba.
No, they just hung that name on her. You
What?
don't even know who the son of David was? Didn't you study this in your little Lutheran Bible school?
Yeah, I know who the son of David is. The son of David. Davidson.
Heard of the name Solomon?
Yeah. I can't keep track of all those Bible names. He begot so and so and they begot so and so and so and so.
Solomon was pretty big.
I know.
He was an attorney, Solomon Blake. Tomas Tora Kimada.
Another Japanese name.
Japanese man named Tomas.
Tomas. Now that sounds familiar. Was he the commander during the bombing of Pearl Harbor? He was a Chinese explorer. But I don't know, I can't remember what he explored. Something in America. Tomas.
Who was the famous conqueror from Mongolia?
Marco Polo.
With a name like Marco Polo, don't you know what country he was from?
No.
Italiano. Genghis Khan.
Oh, yeah. See, I know these names, but I can't put them in reference to what.
How about Marco Polo? What did he explore?
Swimming pools. Marco Polo. Marco Polo. Didn't he explore America?
Any particular spot in America?
I'd say maybe the west part of the country.
So he's California?
Siberia? Nobody came across the frozen straits? Or how did he come over?
Well, how did the French come over? The French that discovered the Grand Tetons and all that. I don't know where he explored. I would say China.
Swimming pool game.
I don't know.
What was Charles Darwin famous for?
Evolution.
What do you mean?
The Darwin trials.
The Darwin trials?
What do you call them?
You're saying he was an attorney?
Uh-huh. Who are we talking about?
He wrote a famous book.
Apparently he was an attorney too.
No, but didn't they use his book in the trial?
Scopes Monkey?
Yes, right?
His theory came up.
Yeah.
What do you remember about Davy Crockett?
Killed the bear when he was only 3. Davy Crockett. He fought in the Alamo. And that was the war with the Mexicans over Texas.
Whose idea was the New Deal?
Roosevelt. FDR.
Who invented the light bulb? Okay.
Thomas Edison. Who invented the cotton gin? Eli.
Braden.
No.
Man.
No. Eli.
Who was it?
Eli Whitney. I know stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not dumb. I know stuff.
European history, though, is tough.
What country was Adolf Hitler from?
Oh, jeez. Austria originally.
What country was Stalin from?
Well, he was the leader of Russia at one point, but was he Russian? Maybe he was German. That name Stalin. I guess German.
From Georgia.
Okay. Part of Russia.
It's part of the USSR.
Right. Part of the USSR.
Who was Leif Erikson?
Leif Erikson was explorer. A lot of people said he really discovered America before Columbus.
What country was he from?
Sweden or Norway. One of the Scandinavian countries.
Who was Neville Chamberlain?
He was something to do with Germany. He was a chancellor of something, wasn't he? England?
Chancellor of England.
Well, Prime Minister of England during World War I. It was something to do with World War I.
Okay.
Am I right? No.
He was the one that kept giving in to Nazis. Hitler.
From what country?
England.
So he was. But that was World War II. But I thought the leader of England during World War II was the guy with the bulldog. What's his name? With the cigars? Churchill.
Yeah, he became prime minister.
Okay, yeah, he preceded. That's right. See, I was close. It wasn't World War I, but it was. I thought we were supposed to get over to American history. Still over there in Europe.
Who was Thespis?
I don't know.
Who was George Washington Carver? Guy who chopped up George Washington.
It was Atticus Finch.
Oh.
Was that your brain burping?
Yeah, Atticus Finch. Right? The attorney?
Are you asking was he an attorney?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yeah. To Kill a Mockingbird. I'll keep shooting him.
Woodrow Wilson.
He was a president?
When?
Some time ago. Was he the president during World War One?
Hi, this is Sal Governale.
I was just joking about the Indians with the beads, you know.
I made a few comments that some consider to be racist and offensive. I was simply trying to do was make a joke.
I was just joking about the Indians.
Over the fact that white women generally don't have sex with black men.
I'm sure you were, Sal.
If I did offend you, I deeply apologize from the bottom of my heart.
Who was Joseph Smith?
I don't know. I mean, I know the name, but I can't. My brain's getting tired.
Who is Pocahontas?
Oh, they're buddies. Joseph Smith and Pocahontas. She helped him out.
She helped out Joseph Smith?
Did they have a thing?
Joseph Smith and Pocahontas?
About how long was this thing?
Apparently his thing traveled through time, too.